They arrived at the glacier at the end of the world. It loomed like a cathedral sculpted by patience, miles of translucent ice rising into a sky that shimmered between dusk and dawn, as though undecided which should rule. The wind here did not howl. It sang, a low, wordless chant that echoed through the valley, resonating in bones rather than ears. Vetra stopped first, her breath caught in the cold air, crystallizing into shards that hung before her face like hesitant thoughts. "This place," she whispered. "I know it." Aaron looked up. The glacier wasn't smooth. It was carved. Faint lines cut into its surface, vast runes spiraling upward, each pulse of light traveling slowly through the ice like a heartbeat frozen mid-beat. Sigrun's voice came softly, reverent for once. "The Temple of Tomorrow," he said, "built before beginnings, sealed before endings. It holds the next breath of creation, the one the universe never dared to take." Aaron frowned. "What's inside?" "Possibility," Sigrun said. "Or ruin. The two are twins, you know." They climbed in silence, their boots crunching through frost so ancient it might once have been starlight. The air grew colder the higher they went, the light dimmer, until the glacier's face opened into a narrow passage glowing faintly from within. Vetra hesitated at the entrance. "Something waits," she said, her voice trembling not from cold but from recognition. "And it knows me." Aaron stepped beside her. "Then we go together." The heart of ice. The corridor sloped downward, carved with precision so perfect that not a single flake had fallen from its walls in eons. The light within the ice pulsed gently, illuminating their faces in alternating hues of silver and blue. At the end, the passage opened into a cavern vast enough to hold mountains. Columns of frozen light supported the ceiling, their surfaces smooth as mirrors, reflecting endless versions of the three travelers as they approached. At the center of the chamber lay an altar of pure crystal, and upon it, sleeping, was a child. Not flesh, not light, something in between. Its form shimmered, as if undecided whether to be solid or radiant. One half of its body glowed softly, golden and warm. The other half was shadow threaded with stars. Aaron stopped, speechless. "What is it?" Vetra's knees weakened. She stepped forward, drawn by an ache older than the world. "It's not what," she whispered. "It's who." Sigrun's voice trembled. "The embodiment of tomorrow, the child of every unspoken promise, every dawn not yet risen. They say when it wakes, time will choose its next shape." Vetra reached the altar. The air around the child vibrated softly, as if protecting it from touch. Her hand hovered above its luminous hair. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Then quieter, "It feels like mine." Aaron frowned. "Yours?" She closed her eyes, memory stirring like a beast long asleep. "Yes, because it is." Sigrun stepped closer. "You mean?" "I remember now," she whispered. "Before I became the hollow goddess, before I gave myself mortality, I was the mother of sequence. I gave birth to time." The words rippled through the cavern, making the pillars tremble with faint harmonics. She turned toward them, tears freezing on her cheeks. "When the first world began, I spun time from my own light, so that creation could move instead of stagnate. Every heartbeat, every breath, every sunrise, all of it flowed from me. But the more it grew, the more it hardened. Eternity began to calcify around itself. Future became predictable. Destiny inevitable. There would come a day when all possibilities froze, a universe trapped in perfect repetition." Aaron's voice was barely audible. "So what did you do?" Vetra looked down at the child. Its eyes fluttered briefly, the faintest motion of tomorrow, trying to dream. "I did the only merciful thing. I erased myself. I scattered my divinity across creation, fractured memory from will, and let time forget its mother." She touched the air above the child's brow, where frost shimmered like a veil. "But I couldn't destroy everything. I left this, the embodiment of what would come next. My last act before forgetting was to cradle tomorrow in the ice, to let it sleep until the world learned to choose again." Sigrun exhaled slowly. "You birthed time and then hit its air. Poetic symmetry. The storyteller in me applauds." Aaron shook his head, overwhelmed. If this is true, then when we woke you from forgetfulness, we began to wake this child too. Vetra nodded. Every act of remembrance has consequences. By learning who I was, I've disturbed the balance. Tomorrow feels my pulse again and begins to stir. The awakening. A sound rose from the altar, not crying, not music, but something between both. The child's chest began to rise and fall, faintly at first, then stronger. The air shimmered with heat that wasn't heat, light that wasn't light. Cracks spidered through the ice walls, glowing with internal fire. Each fissure sang a different note, together forming a chord so vast it made Arin's bones vibrate. Vetra fell to her knees. It's waking too soon. Sigrun's expression hardened. And if it wakes now, time will lose its direction entirely. Past and future will collapse into the same instant. The world will burn and freeze together. Arin stepped forward, then put it back to sleep. I can't, she said, voice breaking. It doesn't obey me anymore. It is me, everything I was and everything I denied. The cavern brightened, the child's glow spreading outward until shadows themselves began to dissolve. Arin shielded his eyes, but through the radiance he saw visions flashing across the ice, galaxies spinning backward, oceans evaporating into unborn clouds, civilizations flickering like candles in wind. Vetra, he shouted, do something. She stood, trembling, every vein in her body glowing faintly. I have to touch it, reminded of what forgetting feels like. Will that work? It might destroy me. Sigrun stepped between them. Or both of you. The narrative doesn't like self-contradiction, mother and child, past and future, coexisting. I have no choice. She approached the altar, light swirling around her. The closer she came, the younger she seemed, the divine aspect peeling away her mortality like bark stripped from a tree. For the first time since Arin had met her, she looked truly godlike, infinite and unbearably human at once. She reached out. The child's eyes opened. One glowed gold, the other black as eclipse. The moment their gazes met, the world stopped breathing. The dialogue of light and shadow. In that frozen instant, Arin felt time halt. His heartbeat paused mid-beat. Sigrun's cloak froze mid-sway. Only Vetra and the child moved, two halves of the same thought meeting at last. The child spoke, its voice layered, both newborn and ancient. You came back. Vetra's lips trembled. I didn't know I'd left. You forgot me, the child said, not accusing, only observing. You scattered yourself across ages. You made me dream alone. I had to, she whispered. If I hadn't, the future would have turned into a prison. Everything would have become certain. The child blinked slowly, and with each blink, the cavern shifted. First spring, then winter, then nothing at all. I was lonely. Vetra's hand passed through the child's glow, light folding gently around her fingers like water around memory. But I'm here now, she whispered, voice trembling between defiance and ache. We can remember together, carefully. The child tilted its head. Its eyes were galaxies before language, its voice the hush between first breath and first word. If we remember together, it said, there will be no tomorrow. There will only be always. Vetra's throat tightened. Tears welled and froze before they could fall. Tiny prisms trembling against her lashes. Then teach me how to remember without ending. Light flared, so bright it folded space around them. The glacier groaned, the temple's ice walls shivering like living glass. The altar liquefied into mist. The floor beneath them rippled, transparent, fragile, bending beneath the weight of eternity, returning to motion. Arin, freed from paralysis, stumbled forward. Every movement felt delayed, as though his limbs dragged against invisible gravity. The air itself thick, with time learning to move again. Each step left faint distortions, ripples of seconds twisting behind him. Sigrun gasped, his voice thin, stretched by awe. They're merging. Arin turned toward him, his face pale beneath the wavering light. What does that mean? Divinity reassembling, Sigrun said hoarsely. The mother becoming whole again. But if she completes herself, if she becomes what she once was, time stops needing to exist. The word struck Arn like thunder. Then she'll destroy everything? Sigrun nodded. Everything that depends on change. Everything that depends on tomorrow. Arn's pulse thundered. There must be a way to keep them both alive, her and time. Sigrun's expression was solemn. Only if she chooses separation again. But once she remembers love, he hesitated. No god ever lets go. Inside the swirling light, Vetra's body flickered between form and memory. She felt herself dissolving, her edges blurring into the child's radiance. Every boundary between them, divine and divine-born, fell away. Memories flooded her, unbearable in their beauty. She saw the first dawn she had ever made. Light uncoiling from her palms like silk, touching the void until it blushed with color. She saw the stars she had planted, spinning through blackness like seeds tossed into fertile soil. She saw mortals lifting their faces toward her sky, praying hours, worshipping seconds, offering gratitude to the ticking of their own hearts. And then she remembered the fatigue that followed, the exhaustion of eternity repeating itself, days layering endlessly atop days, identical as mirrored snowflakes, the weight of immortality pressing down like ice. Moments blurred, purpose faded. Time, once her child, became her warden. She remembered the stillness before her breaking, the moment she had decided to shatter herself, scattering divinity like fragments of glass so that mortality might carry the rhythm of existence in her place. She had become both less and more, the absence of godhood that allowed creation to breathe. And now she remembered why she had left this luminous child behind, to ensure that even gods could still be surprised. "Mother," said the child softly, its voice trembling with both dawn and dusk, "if you leave again, I will fall asleep forever." Vetra reached toward it, her fingers trembling, brushing the edge of its cheek. Its face was made of contrast, half day, half night. "Then maybe that's what must happen," she whispered. "Maybe tomorrow should rest until the world learns to dream again without fear." The child's light flickered. "But you'll be alone." She smiled faintly. "I already was." The child's lips curved, gentle as sunrise forgiving the night. "Will I dream of you?" "Always." She leaned forward and pressed her lips to its brow. The kiss broke the balance. Light erupted not in fury, but in release. It poured outward, flooding the cavern, spilling to the glacier's transparent walls, refracting into countless colors. Ice became water, water became steam, steam became light. The roar was endless, and yet beneath it, the hum of life persisted, a rhythm threading through chaos. Arn was thrown backward, shielding his face. The brilliance pierced even his closed eyes. Sigrun's voice shouted something, a warning, a prayer, but it was swallowed by the radiance. When the light finally receded, silence remained. The altar was gone. The air smelled faintly of salt and ash. The child of light and dark had vanished, and in its place, Vetra lay motionless, her body faintly glowing, her form neither divine nor mortal, something in between. Arn rushed to her side, his breath ragged. Her skin was cold, almost translucent, her veins glowing with faint luminescence. He pressed his ear to her chest and heard it, a slow, uneven heartbeat, each thud separated by silence that felt like centuries. On her wrist, the rune that had once marked her divinity flickered weakly, then steadied, pulsing with soft gold light. Sigrun approached, his voice quiet, reverent. "She's done it," he said. "Tomorrow sleeps once more." Arn looked up sharply, desperate. "But what about her?" Sigrun knelt beside him. "She'll live, but she's no longer goddess nor mortal. She's something in between, the memory of possibility." Vetra stirred, a faint sound escaping her lips. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes that now reflected both sky and earth, both dawn and dusk. "Did it work?" she whispered. Arn smiled through tears. "Yes, you saved everything again." Her chest rose slowly. "Then let me rest." He helped her sit. The cavern around them glowed faintly. The ice above had become translucent, the ceiling painted with refracted light. Outside, the world exhaled. Snow fell softly, drifting in delicate spirals through the temple's opening. But it no longer defied gravity. It fell correctly now, downward, returning to the rhythm of motion. Each flake shimmered as it landed, half bright, half shadowed, the memory of the child embedded in every crystal. Vetra looked up, her voice almost a sigh. Tomorrow dreams again. Sigrun bowed his head, the faintest smile breaking through his exhaustion. And time once more remembers to move. They left the glacier together, their steps slow, reverent, echoing softly across the thawing valley. Behind them, the temple sealed itself, frost weaving across its entrance until it became one seamless wall of memory. Deep within, the child of light and shadow slept, not dead, not gone, but dreaming. Its dream was not beginnings or endings, but of balance, the gentle rhythm between rest and renewal, silence and sound. As the three travelers descended, dawn spread across the horizon. The sky pulsed with uneven light, as though even the sun had learned to breathe differently. Arn looked back one last time. Through the mist, he thought he saw faint shapes moving in the ice, echoes of what had been, hints of what might return. He felt neither grief nor triumph, only awe. Sigrun placed a hand on his shoulder. Come, the story doesn't end here. No, Arn said quietly. It never does. Vetra walked ahead, her hair catching the light. For the first time, her shadow fell behind her, not because she was less divine, but because the world had finally begun to follow her rhythm. Above them, the sky shimmered with color, and far beyond, unseen by any mortal eye, the hourglass of eternity turned once more, slowly, imperfectly, beautifully. Each grain of time fell not as a command, but as a choice. And for the first time in creation, even eternity had learned to tremble. The wind died before he arrived, not the gentle pause before a storm, nor the reverent stillness of prayer, but the kind of silence that feels engineered, as if some invisible hand had adjusted the world's dials until every sound fit neatly into stillness. Arn felt it first, the subtle tightening in the air, the weight that made even breathing feel synchronized. The stars above stopped flickering. The waves on the distant shore froze mid-crest, holding their shape like glass. Then the horizon split open. A figure emerged from the light, vast, deliberate, gliding as if the ground itself turned beneath his feet to carry him forward. He was made not of flesh, but of brass and sorrow, ancient clockwork limbs moving with mournful precision, gears exposed and gleaming with oil that shimmered like tears. His face was carved metal polished to a mirror, and within that reflection ticked countless smaller faces, echoes of every second that had ever passed. Each step he took exhaled a chime. Each breath resynchronized the pulse of the world. Vetra bowed her head instinctively, a gesture of reverence older than memory. The horologer, she whispered, the god who forged the first clock. Sigrun's invisible audience rustled like dry leaves. Ah, he murmured, the patron saint of inevitability. Arn didn't bow. He couldn't. Something about the god perfection filled him with unease, a beauty too precise, too measured. The being radiated order the way fire radiates heat, but it was a kind of order that smothered instead of healed. When he spoke, it was not a voice but a rhythm, a cadence that rearranged the heartbeat of those who heard it. The world is fractured, said the horologer. Time bleeds from every seam. I offer peace. Vetra lifted her gaze. Peace. The god extended his hand. Its palm was a clock face whose hand spun backward. Let the world end in perfect silence, he said. Let the final second stand still forever. No more suffering. No more error. Sigrun smiled thinly. Ah, the old argument. Perfection as euthanasia. But Vetra's expression softened with sorrow. He isn't lying. If everything stopped, truly stopped, there would be no more pain. Arn turned to her, startled. You're considering it? She didn't answer. Her eyes reflected the god's golden symmetry. I remember him. When I created time, he was my first disciple. He begged me for permission to measure what I had made. And I, foolish, said yes. The horologer inclined his head, brass joints gleaming. I measured to preserve. I counted to honor. But creation spiraled into chaos. Clocks multiplied. Hours broke. You abandoned your order. Order isn't life, Arn said quietly. The god's mirrored face turned toward him. You are a fragment, mortal. You speak of life, yet you drown in its errors. I can mend you. A faint click echoed. Behind the horologer, the air folded inward, revealing a vast mechanism stretching into the heavens, a cosmic clock so large it devoured the horizon. Its gears turned at the speed of thought, each tooth engraved with the name of an era. Aaron could see history moving within it. Wars, births, songs, storms, all repeating perfectly, endlessly. Vetra whispered, "He's rewinding reality." "Correcting it," said the god. "A clean end. A perfect loop. No further corruption." Sigrun tilted his head, eyes glinting. "You mean no more surprise, no more stories, and no more failure," the horologer corrected. Vetra took a step forward, trembling. "And no more freedom." The god turned his gaze upon her. "You designed time to break. You gave it flaw. I can heal it." Aaron clenched his fists. "You mean erase it?" The horologer's gears clicked once, a sound like judgment. "Erasure is mercy." The ground beneath them began to vibrate, not violently, but rhythmically, as if the entire world had become a metronome. Trees bowed in perfect intervals. Waves rose and fell in calculated grace. The sun itself pulsed in time with the god's steps. Vetra fell to her knees, gripping her chest. "He's realigning everything. My heartbeat, it's not mine anymore." Aaron rushed to her side. "Fight it." "I can't." He built the first clock for my pulse. The horologer advanced, towering above them. His mirrored face reflected their trembling forms infinitely. "The cycle can end here. No more struggle. No more change." Sigrun stepped between them, his voice dripping with defiance. "And what of story, O God? What of the tale that learns from its own mistakes?" "Story is error perpetuated," said the horologer. "A tale that never reaches its conclusion is a clock that refuses to chime midnight." Sigrun's cloak fluttered. "Then may I never strike 12. The god extended his hand toward him. "I will fix you." Sigrun's audience screamed. Thousands of whispers at once, then silence. His mouth opened, but no words came. His voice was stolen mid-syllable, bound by the divine rhythm. He staggered, clutching his throat. Aaron's anger ignited. "Stop. Discord is a disease," said the horologer. "It ends now." Aaron rose, trembling with fury. He could feel time tightening around his skin like metal. His breath fell into pattern, his heartbeat becoming too precise. Every emotion smoothed, sanitized. "No," he hissed. "Not again." He looked around desperately, at Vetra, struggling to breathe, at Sigrun, mute and fading, at the world itself, turning into a flawless machine. Then he saw it. The faint glint of exposed gears within the god's chest, each one engraved with numbers, each number pulsing like a captive soul. Aaron drew his knife. "You want perfection?" he said. "Let's make a mistake." The god tilted his head. "You cannot harm what is perfect." Aaron smiled grimly. "Then it won't see me coming." He charged. The air thickened, resisting every step. Time itself trying to slow him, but fury had momentum beyond chronology. He reached the horologer, drove the blade between two gleaming gears, and twisted. A sound like thunder made of glass filled the world. The air fractured, trembling as if reality itself were made of brittle crystal. Mountains echoed with the resonance. Rivers froze mid-current. Even light hesitated, refracting into shards that spun wildly through the air. The noise was unbearable. Not volume, but clarity. The sound of everything that had ever been measured suddenly refusing to be counted. The god froze. The gears in his chest, vast, overlapping rings of brass and bone, jammed violently, shrieking against one another. Sparks erupted from the fractures, burning holes into the frozen air. The perfect rhythm that had governed the universe began to cough and stutter, and the pulse of the world faltered with it. Then his mirrored face cracked. For the first time, Aaron saw what lay beneath. Not divinity, not infinite wisdom, but something shockingly familiar. Eyes filled not with wrath, but with fear. Fear of the uncounted second. Fear of imperfection. Fear of life. Aaron stepped forward, the heat of the breaking mechanism blistering his skin. He leaned close, shouting over the roar of grinding eternity. Perfection is just fear wearing symmetry. And with that, he tore the blade downward. The steel met resistance for only an instant before slicing through the god's core. The sound that followed was not a scream, but an implosion, the collapse of precision itself. Seconds shattered, minutes folded in on themselves, and the air filled with a haunting echo of time breaking its own chains. The giant clock on the horizon convulsed. Its monumental hands spun backward, then forward, tearing through centuries as though they were silk. Stars blinked out, reversed, flared again, dying and being born in the same heartbeat. Across the sky, constellations screamed silently as their order unraveled. Vetra's chains of rhythm, the divine harmonies that had bound her heart, dissolved into dust. Her chest rose sharply as her own heartbeat returned, uneven, wild, alive. She gasped as though breathing for the first time, collapsing into Arin's arms. He caught her, both of them trembling beneath the chaos they had unleashed. Sigrun stumbled backward, clutching his throat. His voice returned in a broken rasp. "You broke him." "I broke the cage," Arin said, his voice shaking with exhaustion and awe. The horologer, the god of time, once radiant with mechanical certainty, fell to his knees. His body cracked along seams of brass and silver, light pouring from within in great, desperate streams. For the first time, he looked small, not vast or eternal, but ancient and afraid. His once perfect voice wavered, dissonant and fragile. "Chaos," he whispered, every syllable an echo of a collapsing clock. "I hear chaos." Vetra rose unsteadily, her aura flickering like a candle in the wind. She looked down at him, not with hatred, but with pity. "You hear life," she said softly. The god's mirrored eyes flickered with confusion. His gears still ground against one another, resisting silence. "Imperfect." She nodded once. "Exactly." His trembling hand reached toward her, not to strike, not a command, but to ask. For understanding, for forgiveness. "Then who?" His voice stuttered, mechanism sparking violently. "Who keeps time?" Vetra stepped closer, her expression calm. She placed her hand upon the cracked brass of his chest, where the rhythm still faltered between beat and silence. "No one keeps it," she whispered. "We live it." For a single moment, something shifted behind his eyes, a comprehension too vast to last. The mirrored fragments reflected not one future, but thousands, worlds radiant with joy, others falling into ruin. Countless paths folding and blooming from a single golden heartbeat. In the center of them all, time itself pulsed like a newborn heart, trembling, imperfect, infinite. Then the light dimmed. The gears inside the god shuddered one final time, then stilled. The glow within his chest faded, turning to dust. The brass shell collapsed inward, crumbling into fine powder that the wind caught and carried away. The horologer was gone. The world shuddered. For the first time since the dawn of order, nothing matched. The sun hesitated, skipping across the sky in uneven leaps. Clouds twisted without symmetry. The tide rose and fell in unpredictable rhythm, breaking against the shore in erratic laughter. It was chaos. It was freedom. Vetra exhaled, half sob, half laughter. Her voice trembled, not from fear but from awe. "It's free again," she said, tears freezing on her cheeks before melting in the newborn wind. Sigrun coughed, his restored voice rasping but alive. "A fine disaster," he muttered. "The audience would approve." Arin stood silently, staring at his trembling hands. They were stained with the remnants of divine oil and blood, and something else. Time, slick and luminous, slipping between his fingers like quicksilver. "It feels wrong," he said quietly. "Good," Vetra replied. "That means it's real." They stood together in the wreckage of perfection, amid the shattered remains of celestial gears and fractured mirrors that still whispered faintly. Each fragment hummed a different note, overlapping into a dissonant but living chorus. Sigrun knelt and picked up on the fragments, a small gear still glowing faintly at its core. It burned his fingertips, but he didn't let go. "Listen," he said. Arin and Vetra turned toward him. The gear did not speak in words, but in rhythm. A faint, irregular pulse, a heartbeat slightly off-tempo, human in its imperfection. Vetra smiled, a weary light in her eyes. He left us a reminder. Aaron frowned. Of what? That even gods, she said, can be afraid of being unfinished. The wind swirled through the ruins, lifting dust and fragments of light into motion. Around them, the broken clock face on the horizon dissolved, its numbers scattering into the sky like constellations freed from order. Vetra looked toward the uneven sunrise, red clouds drifting in broken formation, the light slanting unevenly across the shattered landscape. Birds flew overhead, their patterns chaotic and alive, tracing paths that no geometry could predict. It was beautiful precisely because it did not fit. Sigrun slipped the glowing gear into his cloak, its hum pressing faintly against his chest. So, he said, his voice rough but playful, what happens next? Aaron followed his gaze to the sky. With the first crooked dawn, a new age painted everything in uneven gold. Whatever doesn't make sense yet. Vetra nodded, her eyes glinting with quiet amusement. That's how tomorrow begins. They turned from the ruins and began to walk. 3 figures outlined against the fractured light. Behind them, the remnants of the divine clock stirred one last time, then fell silent. The wind, newborn and untamed, carried with it a faint echo, not of ticking but of breathing, a rhythm unmeasured, a heartbeat, uneven, human, and for the first time since the beginning of all things, the world did not march. It moved. They descended through a valley of frozen light, until the ground dissolved into reflection. At first it looked like glass, a wide, perfect mirror that swallowed the horizon, but then Aaron saw it move. Waves formed without sound, slow and deliberate, bending the sky downward. Beneath their feet shimmered an ocean without depth, circular and infinite, as if the universe had decided to fold itself into one eternal moment. Vetra's breath fogged the air. We've reached it, she whispered, the heart of the timeline. Sigrun's voice trembled with awe. Every age ends here and begins again. The water glowed faintly from within, rippling with color that wasn't light but memory. Each crest carried an image, moments drifting like leaves on still water. Cities rising and falling, lovers parting, gods dying, the first spark of dawn repeating endlessly. It was all there, every second that had ever existed, reflected yet alive. Aaron knelt near the shore. The surface was so still it reflected his face with impossible clarity. Yet his reflection wasn't still. It moved before he did, a heartbeat ahead. He saw his entire life in a blink, his childhood, his first grief, the journey with Vetra and Sigrun, and the countless choices he hadn't made. The ocean remembers everything, Vetra said softly. It isn't water. It's what binds existence together. Every memory, every possibility, all adrift, waiting to be chosen again. Sigrun laughed quietly, though there was no humor in it. A storyteller's nightmare, an audience that never forgets. They stood at the edge for a long time. The air hummed with a low, steady vibration, as though the hard reality beat beneath their feet. Around them, the horizon curved inward, folding time upon itself until sky and sea became one continuous circle. Aaron finally broke the silence. If this is the heart, how do we end the cycle? Vetra's eyes glimmered with pain. To end it, she said, someone must dive into reflection and stay there, become forgotten, erased from memory. The heart demands an anchor, one being to hold all that was so the rest can move forward free of repetition. Sigrun frowned. A sacrifice? Vetra nodded. A memory given up to grant motion again. Without it, time loops forever, reusing the same griefs until meaning rots. The storyteller's invisible audience murmured anxiously, and who will be the willing ghost? Sigrun asked, though he already knew. Aaron stepped closer to the water. The ripples trembled as if recognizing him. It has to be me. Vetra turned sharply. No, you said it yourself, he replied. The one who dives must carry memory, not divinity, not prophecy, just memory. I'm the only one who has lived enough to bear it. Her eyes filled with tears that froze before falling. You don't understand what it means. You won't just die. You'll be unwritten. Every trace of you will vanish from the worlds you saved. Even I, Her voice broke. Even I won't remember your name. Arin smiled faintly, then remembered the feeling instead. The reflection below him shimmered, responding to his resolve. Scenes from his life rose like breath beneath glass. The village that burned, the river he crossed with Vetra, the smile of his mother long gone. Each image drifted toward him like a farewell. Sigrun watched silently, his cloak rustling with whispers. "Every tale needs a final line," he said. "I'd rather it weren't this one." Arin turned to him. "Then make sure the next story begins better." He removed his gloves, feeling the chill of timelessness bite into his skin. "If one of us must stay forgotten, let it be the one who remembers why we began." Vetra grabbed his wrist. "You can't. You defied gods, rewrote destiny, and now you'll erase yourself." He met her gaze. "I didn't fight for myself. I fought so something new could exist." She tried to speak, but the words failed her. The circular ocean stirred. The reflection shifted, showing now not the past but what might have been. Arin growing old beside her, a quiet home, peace after endless wandering. The images blurred, sweet and unbearable. He exhaled slowly. Even possibilities mourn. Vetra trembled. "Please, there must be another way." Sigrun shook his head. "Endings demand witness, not alternatives." The goddess turned to the storyteller, fury in her voice. "Then you go. You've spent eternity speaking of sacrifice. Live it." Sigrun smiled bitterly. "I already did, long ago. I gave up my voice to hold the present. This time it's his turn." The ocean pulsed once, a vast, luminous heartbeat. The air thickened. Shadows bent inward, drawn toward Arin, as if the timeline itself recognized its offering. He knelt, hand hovering over the surface. "What happens when I go in?" Vetra's voice was a whisper. "You'll fall through every reflection until none recognize you. When you reach the center, you'll dissolve into memory's root. You'll become the silence between moments, the pause that lets everything else continue." He nodded slowly. "That doesn't sound so bad." She grasped his face, her touch trembling. "It's worse than death. Death ends a life. This isn't the meaning of one." Arin leaned his forehead against hers. "Then promise me this. Don't let perfection take root again. Don't let the gods freeze what we broke." Tears glimmered on her lashes. "I swear it." He smiled faintly. "Good." He stood, took one last look at the horizon, at the uneven sky, the crooked dawn they had earned, and stepped into the ocean. The water did not splash. It accepted him like recognition. Ripples spread outward in concentric circles, each one glowing with scenes that shimmered then dissolved. The air grew warm, fragrant with the scent of rain and memory. Vetra reached out, but her hand met only reflection. "Arin!" He looked back once, his figure already fading beneath the glassy surface. "Remember what matters," he said, his voice calm. Then he sank. The ocean reacted. The reflections began to blur, colliding, merging. Whole centuries folded inward, collapsing into new constellations. The circular horizon pulsed once, then opened, releasing a column of light that shot into the sky like an inverted waterfall. Sigrun shielded his eyes. "He's rewriting the heartbeat." Vetra fell to her knees. "No, he's becoming it." The column widened, swallowing the world's curvature. The ocean rose, but not as water, as pure chronology. Waves of light unfurled, sweeping across everything, erasing repetition, washing the universe clean of memory's dust. Every forgotten song was sung once more. Every lost soul blinked in passing recognition before fading again into peace. The past did not vanish. It softened like a wound healed into scar. At the center of the light, Arin's shape dissolved completely. In his place, a pulse remained, steady, quiet, alive. The ocean stilled. When silence returned, it was not absence but balance. The air trembled with potential. Sigrun exhaled shakily. "It's done." Vetra stared at the water. Her reflection no longer showed Arin. Only her, alone, eternal, breathing in a world reborn. She whispered to the waves, "Thank you," though she could not remember why. The ocean glowed faintly in reply, not with the harsh brilliance of stars or fire, but with a soft, inward light, as though it had remembered something too sacred to say aloud. Waves rose and fell in gentle cadence, their motion slower than breath, older than thought. Then, upon the surface, ripples began to form. They converged and intertwined, not at random but with deliberate rhythm, spelling a single word that shimmered for a heartbeat before dissolving beneath the current. Continue. The letters sank back into the water, leaving behind only concentric circles of pale light. They spread outward, touching everything. The broken shores, the frost-licked stones, the trembling air that carried the faint hum of rebirth. Vetra stood at the edge, her bare feet upon the new soil, her reflection fractured across the water's surface. For a long moment, she said nothing. The wind stirred her hair, lifting strands of light and darkness alike, both woven now into her being. She rose slowly, her movements both weary and eternal. Her gaze turned toward the horizon, where the first threads of dawn unraveled through the mist. The light was uneven, imperfect, and precisely because of that it was alive. The sky no longer obeyed the symmetry of gods. It breathed. Clouds moved with emotion. The sun, hesitant and tender, painted the edge of the world in a gold that had never existed before. Behind her, footsteps whispered upon the damp ground. Sigrun emerged from the thinning fog, his figure changed by the long silence he had endured. His eyes, once burdened with every story ever told, now shone with a quiet peace, the peace of one who had finally forgotten enough to begin again. He approached slowly, not wishing to disturb her communion with the newborn horizon. His voice, when he spoke, carried the fragility of new time. "What do you see?" Vetra did not answer at once. Her breath clouded in the cool air, scattering like tiny fragments of memory. Then she smiled faintly, a smile that trembled between joy and exhaustion. Tears formed, crystalline against her skin. They did not fall. They froze upon her cheeks, small jewels of water and light, each one holding a reflection of the awakening world. "I see time beginning again," she whispered. Her words spread to the dawn like pollen, soft, invisible, unstoppable. The ocean stirred in answer. Far below, beneath the shifting waves, the heart of the timeline began to beat once more. It was not a heart made of flesh or metal, but a memory itself. A vast pulse encased in liquid light, suspended in the circular ocean's depths. Each beat rippled through creation, resonating through continents still asleep, through seeds waiting beneath snow, through the dreams of unborn minds. The world's new pulse was not mechanical. It was relational, built from connection rather than order. With every tremor of that unseen heart, moments aligned themselves again, but gently, without force. Seconds began to bloom like petals opening to daylight. Minutes followed, hesitant and delicate. The fabric of continuity rewove itself, shimmering in the ocean's reflection. And at its very center, where no eye could see and no god could reach, one forgotten name glowed softly. No one would ever speak it again. It belonged to no faith, no legend, no story, yet its presence remained. It was a soundless signature of the choice that had remade everything. Arin's devotion carved into eternity, unclaimed, uncelebrated, but immortal. The universe carried it forward, not as a word, but as an echo, a frequency hidden within every heartbeat, every gust of wind, every ripple that ever touched another. It was a rhythm that kept things moving when hope faltered. It was the murmur behind laughter, the hush before music. It was continuation made tangible. The wind picked up, brushing through Vetra's hair. It carried since the world had nearly forgotten. Salt, cedar, rain before falls. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, and for the first time in ages, she felt something close to peace. Not the hollow perfection of stillness, but the comfort of movement. Sigrun watched her, his expression solemn yet luminous. He understood now why stories were meant to end, not to vanish, but to seed new ones. His own voice, once cursed to echo every tale, was quiet now, content to listen. The three of them, goddess, storyteller, and ghost of a man who had written himself into the world's marrow, would live on differently. Arin's name might never be spoken again, but his rhythm had become the foundation of motion itself. "Do you think they'll remember us?" Sigrun asked after a time. Vetra shook her head gently. "Not as we were," she said. "But they'll feel us, in every hesitation before a choice, in every pause before love. We'll be there not as gods, not as myths, but as the breath between moments. The horizon widened. Light spilled over the water, breaking into gold and rose. The ocean shimmered, breathing. Sigrun tilted his head. Then perhaps that's the greatest story of all. Vetra smiled. No, it's the first one told correctly. Below them, the circular ocean began to spin. Its currents moved not in straight lines, but in spirals, deliberate, graceful, eternal. Every motion sent small sparks of light upward, where they became new stars, faint and trembling but radiant in their innocence. Each spark carried a fraction of memory, a laugh from forgotten century, a tear shed by an unseen god, a promise whispered at the beginning of everything. The stars scattered across the firmament, finding places where none had existed before. The sky no longer reflected order. It reflected intention. Every ripple, every shimmer, every faint vibration in the air spoke of one truth, repeated endlessly through the weave of creation. Continue. It was not command or prophecy. It was kindness. It was a permission to exist again, to try again, to fail and still move forward. The word became law, and the law became song. And the song, that low, endless hum, carried forward through time, through every dawn yet to rise. Vetra turned from the ocean at last. Her eyes, full of dawnlight, lingered on the ripples still shimmering with that single word. He'll hear it, she said softly. Sigrun looked at her, puzzled. Who? The one who will stumble next, she replied. The next to love enough to break the world and mend it differently. The wind rose, catching her final words and scattering them like seeds. The waves quieted. The light settled. And far below, the heart of the timeline pulsed once more, not loudly, not in triumph, but in gentle continuity. Each beat carried that unspoken name farther into the ages, guiding eternity not through perfection, but through persistence. Above, dawn widened into day. The light spread unevenly, clinging to clouds, glancing off stone, embracing perfection like a long-lost friend. The ocean breathed again. The horizon opened its arms. And the world, fragile, incomplete, alive, stepped forward. They stood at the edge of the circular ocean, where memory rippled like light breathed through water. The surface shimmered with impossible depth, and infinity turned inward, each layer a reflection of every choice that had ever been made and unmade. Arin had already stepped forward, one foot poised above the luminous current, when Vetra spoke his name. Her voice was barely sound, more like a prayer remembering itself, a fragment of divinity rediscovering language. He turned to her, the faint light of the ocean painting his face in silver. His eyes held that quiet resolve she had always feared, the calm of someone who had already accepted his own erasure. It has to be me, he said again, softly but unshakably. Vetra's expression trembled between love and terror. Around them, the surface of the ocean rippled with mirrored scenes, phantoms of what could have been. She saw herself reaching for his hand. She saw herself letting him go. Each reflection looped endlessly, every possibility alive and unfinished, repeating across the water's memory like a warning. She understood then what the heart of the timeline truly was. It didn't predict, it recorded. It was the archive of every decision before it was made, an eternal rehearsal of consequence. And in every reflection, across every age, she saw herself fail. She saw herself too late, too afraid, too bound by love to alter the inevitable. Not this time. The thought came not as rebellion, but as peace. She smiled sadly, a goddess remembering humanity. You once asked me what gods fear, she said. Her voice trembled like light through smoke. I told you, endings. Arin frowned, brow furrowing in confusion. Vetra, were you? I was wrong. She took a slow step closer, her feet leaving luminous prints that faded behind her. We fear remembering. And before he could move, before the horror in his eyes could reach his hands, she pushed past him, her palms bursting with radiance. Then she leapt into the ocean. The surface accepted her not with splash or sound but with grace, folding inward like silk. Arin shouted her name and dove after her, but the reflection sealed like glass, hurling him backward. The air itself cracked around him as he hit the ground. The timeline had denied pursuit. It would not allow another to follow where origin returned to itself. The last thing he saw was her face disappearing beneath the luminous water, calm, unafraid, radiant as dawn. The descent. The water was not cold. It was aware. It recognized her. It wrapped around her gently, the way a mother recognizes a heartbeat of a child she has not held in centuries. Every droplet trembled with memory. Every current curled around her form like the arms of time embracing its creator. Vetra sank slowly, light spilling from her skin. Her body became translucent, her veins flowing with starlight instead of blood. Constellations shimmered across her, familiar ones, forgotten ones, constellations from skies that no longer existed. It was as though the universe were repainting itself across her form, trying to remember the artist it had lost. Then came the memories. They struck not as visions, but as floods, entire epics collapsing into her at once. She felt the first spark of creation ignite inside her lungs, heard the hum that once called galaxies into shape. She felt the tremor of the first creature daring to name the stars, the heat of the first sunrise upon matter that had never known touch. She saw deserts bloom, rivers crawl toward meaning, mountains rise in prayer. She saw kingdoms rise and crumble into dust, lovers meet and part beneath stars that whisper their names to eternity. She felt suns flare, die, and scatter themselves across the dark, just so something new could learn to shine. Every scream of birth, every sigh of surrender, every prayer whispered into nothing, all of it was her. It filled her until she could no longer tell where her being ended and existence began. And then she remembered the gods who had forgotten her, the forgers of fate who feared free will, the keepers of order who mistook repetition for peace, the dreamers who had turned despair into constellations. She remembered Arin's laughter on the frozen bridge. She remembered Sigrin's stories, their endings folding into beginnings. She remembered the horologe of perfection cracking open to reveal mercy. And she remembered herself, not as deity nor myth, but as the pulse that allowed time to breathe. At the bottom of the ocean, light gathered into a sphere the size of a heart. It beat once every eternity, each pulse bending reality outward. The heart of the timeline, pure, patient, endless. Vetra approached it, her body unraveling into filaments of light and song. Her hair dissolved into rhythm. Her breath became vibration. She felt herself thinning into resonance, becoming more truth than shape. And in that moment, she understood this was not sacrifice. It was reclamation. The world had carried her name unconsciously in every heartbeat, every second of motion. Now she was simply taking it back. The song of stillness. The sphere open like an eye. Inside it burned totality of motion, the complete inventory of every cause, every consequence. Time itself distilled. It spoke to her in a voice older than sound. Be still and you will die. Sing and all will stop with you. Vetra smiled, her voice trembling with awe. Then let it be music. Her first note wasn't sound. It was remembrance made audible. The vibration carried through the water, through stone, through history itself. Each tone she released contained an age. She sang the laughter of children born beneath starlight. She sang the forgiveness of mortals who no longer hated their gods. She sang the first tear ever shed in joy. Her voice became infinite threads weaving through silence. Each a story, each a moment that had once been too small for divinity to notice, but too sacred for time to erase. The ocean listened. Its waves slowed, then stopped entirely. Reflections froze mid-ripple. The entire circular sea became a single, unmoving mirror, a vast stillness that hummed with the memory of her song. Above, Arin felt the change. The air stilled, pressing against his chest. His heartbeat faltered, hesitating as if unsure whether to continue. Even the wind paused, reverent. Sigrin's voice broke the silence, a whisper shaking with awe. She's singing time to sleep. Arin fell to his knees, his eyes wide, reflecting the frozen ocean. And if it doesn't wake again? Sigrin's answer came soft, heavy with understanding. Then, he looked toward the silent horizon, will be the pause before creation tries again. The surface of the world shimmered with Vetra's song. Every living thing, every grain of sand, every lingering echo bent toward it. The hum of existence quieted. The stars dimmed, as though listening. The universe, for the briefest and most infinite moment, knew stillness, not as death, but as peace. And in the center of that stillness, Vetra's voice continued, soft and endless, carrying the final truth through the water and the air and the silence between both. That to love existence was to risk ending it, and to remember it fully was to begin again. Within the depths, below, Vetra's song wove itself into the core of the heart. The light began to soften, melting into her until they became indistinguishable. Each breath she took rewrote the pulse of reality. She saw Arn again, not as he was now, but across infinite variations, a warrior, a poet, a father, a flame. She kissed each version farewell through the music, knowing none would remember. She saw Sigrun, surrounded by the ghosts of his audience, finally at peace as his words folded into silence. She saw the horologer's shattered gears were forming into constellations, imperfect, glowing, alive. She saw the child of tomorrow still sleeping beneath the glacier, dreaming now not of destiny, but of choice. And she sang louder. The ocean began to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. Every reflection trembled. Histories blending into one another, tragedies rewritten into grace. Mountains that had fallen stood again only to crumble anew. Civilizations breathed once more just to vanish gently, leaving echoes instead of scars. It was all beautiful, and it was all enough. The song shifted tone, slowing, deepening. She was reaching the final verse, the one that required silence. Her light dimmed, her form dissolving into the current. She was becoming memory itself, the invisible foundation of continuity. Her last thought was of Arn. He will not remember me, she realized, but he will live in the space I leave. That, she knew, was eternity's truest mercy, the breath held by the world. Above, the ocean glowed like a mirror of stars turned inward. The air shimmered. Every particle of existence paused. Arn felt the weight of waiting. The stillness wasn't death, it was suspense. The universe listening for its cue. Sigrun clutched his cloak, tears tracing lines through the dust on his face. If she finishes the song, he said, time will have no need for gods anymore. Then what will we be? Arn asked. Sigrun smiled faintly. Grateful. The light from the ocean began to fade, not into darkness but into transparency. The reflections disappeared one by one, until only the surface remained. Smooth, blank, infinite. Then, like the first inhalation after grief, the world breathed. Wind returned, uneven and wild. The waves stirred again, no longer perfect mirrors but honest water, carrying sunlight and shadow alike. The air filled with the scent of new rain, the smell of a story starting over. Arn rose slowly, feeling the tremor beneath his feet. She did it, he whispered. She ended the cycle. Sigrun looked toward the horizon and rode us into the next one. Arn stared at the ocean center. A faint glow remained, pulsing like a heartbeat. It wasn't her, not anymore, but something of her essence lingered, humming softly. The frequency of mercy. He knelt and touched the surface. It was warm. In that warmth, a single word echoed, not spoken, not written, but understood. Breathe. He obeyed. After the silence, they left the shore at dawn. The sky had learned color again, uneven, glorious, flawed. Birds sang notes that didn't rhyme. Rivers ignored their paths and carved new ones. The world was no longer following a script. Arn walked beside Sigrun without speaking. Each step felt heavier, not from grief but from meaning returned. She's gone, he said quietly. Sigrun nodded. No, she's everywhere. Every second that refuses to repeat her death, that's her gift. Arn looked back once more. The ocean shimmered far behind them, perfectly circular, yet alive with ripples, a heart still beating. He whispered to the wind, "Thank you." For a moment, the breeze changed direction, brushing his cheek like a familiar hand. Then it was gone. Sigrun placed a hand on his shoulder. She sang the world into stillness. Now it's our turn to teach it how to move again. Arn smiled faintly. Then let's begin. And as they walked toward the horizon, the first sunrise of the new age broke across the sky. Uneven, shimmering, beautiful. The world exhaled fully, light spilling across valleys that had forgotten warmth. Far beneath them, at the heart of the circular ocean, a voice long silent whispered to itself one final line. The coda of creation, the quiet between breaths. All that lives remembers love, even when love forgets itself. The sea rippled once, as if nodding in agreement, and for the first time since the dawn of existence, time did not restart, it continued. The silence came like the closing of a door no one realized had been open. It didn't arrive gradually, like dust creeping over a tired horizon. It came all at once, absolute, immediate, final. There was no fading of sound, no gentle dimming of the hum that had filled existence. There was only a sudden, seamless absence. The wind stopped mid-gesture, its invisible hand still poised in the air. The trees froze mid-sway, leaves suspended like startled thoughts that had forgotten where they were going. Even the sea turned to glass. Aaron blinked, and that single, human motion felt like heresy. The movement of his eyelids broke a law that no longer existed. His heartbeat roared in his ears, the only rhythm left in creation. Time had stopped, utterly. He stood inside daylight that never aged. The sun hung eternally at its zenith, a golden eye that refused to blink. Its rays touched everything, but their warmth was gone, replaced by a pale imitation of light, a reminder of heat rather than heat itself. The sky was a single, unending color. No clouds drifted, no birds dared to cut across the frozen blue. The world had become an unmoving fresco painted by a divine hand too afraid to lift its brush again. Aaron took a hesitant step forward. The sound, his own foot meeting the earth, echoed monstrously, rolling across the empty plains like thunder. It was not that the sound was loud. It was that nothing else remained to balance it. His breath, too, was blasphemous, a rhythm intruding upon stillness. He looked down. The ground bore no mark from his step. The soil was not soil anymore, but memory fixed in place, incapable of responding. He realized with a strange clarity that motion itself was now an illusion. There was no before to his step, no after. His stride existed only because he believed it did. Vetra was gone. Sigrun, too, the air that had once hummed with her song, was now a monument to stillness. Every vibration that had once carried her laughter had solidified into silence. Aaron whispered her name, softly, reverently. It did not echo. The sound collapsed in his throat, dying before it reached the air. Words, he realized, needed time to exist, to move from one instant to another. Without time, speech was only memory trapped in flesh. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the faint thud beneath his ribs. The heartbeat persisted, though it no longer counted anything. It was simply there, a mechanical persistence against the collapse of order. He was the only motion left in the universe. He wandered, or perhaps he didn't. Wandering implied distance, and there was none. The world neither receded nor approached. The horizon stayed fixed, flat, infinite, a painting stretched too tightly over existence. And yet, as Aaron moved through it, something subtle stirred beneath the surface of stillness. Not life, not motion, something older. It was remembrance. The world, though frozen, was beginning to remember itself. He knelt beside a river locked in crystal clarity. It had been mid-flow when time stopped, and now each droplet hung in air, a jewel catching the light of the sun that never shifted. Inside the water's surface he saw not his reflection, but a collage of moments. Vetra laughing beside a fire, Sigrun tracing runes into the sand with a child's patience, his mother's hands planting seeds in a forgotten garden beneath an ordinary dawn. The river was not flowing, but memory was. Aaron reached out, touching the glassy surface. Ripples formed, not physical but emotional. Each thought he had sent faint distortions across reality. The world, it seemed, was now shaped by remembrance. He understood then. Memory had become the new clock. Every thought he allowed into being reshaped the air. When he remembered rain, droplets appeared midair, trembling for an instant before vanishing. When he thought of sorrow, the light dimmed, and the sky took on the dull hue of grief. When he remembered laughter, The air shimmered, and he felt something warm brush his cheek, like a ghost of joy. The universe had surrendered its rhythm to his recollection. He laughed softly, though there was no air to carry the sound. The vibration stayed within his body, resonating through his bones. "So this is what it means," he whispered, voice trembling. "To live after time." The laugh lingered, not as sound. Sound was gone, but as a presence that refused to end. He walked again, though walking no longer meant progress. Each step carried him not through space, but through memory. The valley he crossed became his childhood street, shimmering between both realities. The mountains beyond him reshaped into the walls of the library where he had first met Vetra. When he blinked, he was standing beneath stars that no longer existed. When he exhaled, he was holding her hand for the first time again. There was no sequence anymore, only simultaneity. He lived 1,000 lives inside a single inhalation. He saw himself as a boy chasing fireflies beneath the old trees, as a soldier standing beneath skies burning with the mistakes of gods, as an old man teaching forgotten languages to children who never aged, as a shadow fading between his own memories, watching himself from the corners of time's absence. Every version of him looked back at the others, nodding in quiet understanding. They were no longer separate moments. They were facets of the same soul, the same choice endlessly refracted. Above him, the sun hung motionless, a golden wound in the sky. Sometimes Aaron thought it blinked, a trick of his weary eyes, as though the heavens were struggling to remember how to move. But it remained where it was, unblinking, unchanging. A perfect witness, a perfect silence, a perfect prison. He began to understand that perfection was indistinguishable from stillness, and stillness from death. He laughed again, softly, bitterly. Even light forgot how to move. He walked until the meaning of walking dissolved, until he could no longer tell whether he was moving through the world or the world was moving through him. The boundaries between self and scene blurred. The horizon pulsed with his thoughts. When he felt longing, it deepened, creating valleys and storms that weren't real but remembered. When he felt hope, light flickered faintly across the frozen clouds. Emotion had become the only surviving form of motion, and so he wandered through his own feelings, painting what remained of existence with the colors of remembrance. Eventually he reached the hill where the wind had once carried Vetra's laughter, the sound that had once threaded the silence between dawn and dusk. It was still there impossibly, suspended midair like light sculpted into sound. The curve of her smile shimmered faintly, made visible by the way the frozen air refracted memory. Aaron climbed the hill slowly, each step careful, reverent. The sight of her frozen echo stole the breath he did not need. He reached out, his hand trembling just before touching it. The shape of her laughter, pure, weightless, unguarded, seemed to tremble in response, though nothing could move. He feared that remembering her too vividly might fracture the delicate balance that kept the universe from collapsing completely. He whispered, more to himself than to her memory, "You said the world would breathe again." The words left Aaron's lips as a tremor, as though the act of speaking might crack the glass that reality had become. The sound was not quite sound, more a memory of language finding its way back into existence. His voice drifted across the stillness like dust disturbed in a cathedral long abandoned. The air received the words but did not move. They lingered, suspended, echoes with nowhere to go. For a heartbeat that had forgotten how to count itself, nothing happened. The horizon remained a painted edge. The sun hung in its golden paralysis. Even the shadows, sculpted into their eternal shapes, refused to soften. The world was a photograph of its own final breath. And then, somewhere so far within the quiet that even silence had to lean closer to listen, something shifted. It was not a sound at first. It was subtler than that. A pressure, a suggestion, a thought rippling to the fabric of nothing, like the faintest vibration inside the bones of God trying to wake from too long a sleep. The shift deepened. A vibration, a hum, a single, cautious breath. The air trembled, almost shy, as if the universe were testing its own lungs for the first time in centuries. Aaron's eyes widened. He could feel it not in the air, but beneath it, beneath everything. A pulse, soft, uneven, searching for rhythm. He closed his eyes, kneeling on the unmoving ground. Beneath his palm, he felt again the faint quiver of soil remembering movement. The earth itself seemed to shiver with a thought too ancient for language. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it was beginning. The hum grew slowly, threading itself through the silence like a cautious question. It did not break the stillness. It wove through it, filling the cracks where eternity had dried. Aaron opened his mouth, afraid to breathe too loudly, afraid to disturb the fragile heartbeat of rebirth. He exhaled softly, and in that exhalation the air found its partner. The world inhaled in return a small, uncertain draw of breath. He smiled. "There you are," he whispered, as though speaking to a child. The light above shifted, barely perceptible. The sun quivered, its rays shivering against the edges of the frozen clouds. They did not yet move, but their brightness flickered. The first imperfection to touch heaven since stillness had conquered it. Aaron felt tears forming. They did not fall. They hovered, caught between gravity and memory, trembling like tiny glass planets orbiting his cheeks. The hum continued, faint but insistent, resonating not through air but through memory itself. Every frozen object remembered what it had been. The rivers began to recall the feeling of flow. The mountains remembered weight. The trees remembered the art of swaying. Even the light remembered how to bend. Aaron rose slowly, afraid that motion might break the spell. His body felt impossibly heavy, like every muscle was carrying the ghost of time itself. He placed a hand over his heart. Its rhythm faltered, then matched the world's faint pulse, syncing with the newborn vibration around him. He whispered her name, Vetra. The name rippled outward, barely disturbing the air. But it reached something. The frozen echo of her laughter shimmered where it hung, caught between moments. For the briefest instant it moved, not forward but alive. The hum deepened. Somewhere beneath the surface of stillness, a current stirred. The river's glass skin fractured just slightly, as though the world's first exhale brushed against it. Aaron stepped closer. "You hear it, don't you?" There was no answer, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt pregnant, full of meaning waiting to be born. He fell to his knees beside the broken reflection of water, his fingers tracing the cracks. Light spilled through them like veins rediscovering blood. He laughed, the sound breaking awkwardly from his throat. It startled him. He hadn't heard true sound in what felt like eternity. The laughter came again, fragile but real. "It's working," he said aloud, as though speaking could help anchor motion. "It's starting." The word starting carried power. The air shivered around it, resonating like a struck chord. Above him, the sun blinked. Not fully, not yet, but its edges trembled, halo flickering as if considering descent. The shadow of his body shifted slightly. It was only an inch, but that inch was enough to break the perfect geometry of eternity. Aaron gasped, hand to his mouth. The movement had created difference. Before and after, the world had made time again. The hum became a rhythm. It beat through the ground, through the mountains, through the sky itself. Not steady yet, not whole, like a heartbeat learning to trust itself. Aaron closed his eyes and let it fill him. He could almost hear her voice inside the vibration, soft, weary, amused. "You see? Even silence breathes when it remembers love." He opened his mouth to answer, but tears drowned the words. He pressed his forehead to the earth, whispering into it as if she could hear him through the soil and the water and the stillness now loosening its hold. "You said the world would breathe again," he repeated, voice breaking. "And you were right." The hum replied with warmth. The air began to carry scent again, faint traces of rain, of grass, of fire long gone cold. All around him, the frozen shapes of existence began to tremble. The trees shivered, releasing their suspended leaves. They fell not in perfect unison, but in gentle disorder, scattering across the ground in small, beautiful chaos. The sea cracked like a sigh. Its surface broke into fragments that caught the light, refracting it into prisms that danced for the first time in forever. Clouds stirred, testing their edges. A soft wind, the first breath of the resurrected world, moved through the valley, carrying a whisper that was almost but not quite words. It sounded like thank you. Aaron looked up, blinking against the sudden brightness. The sun was moving again, slowly, shyly, but undeniably. Shadows lengthened, thin and fragile, reaching toward him like newborn limbs. He felt laughter building in his chest, wild, disbelieving laughter. It escaped him before he could stop it, ringing through the newly awakened air. He spun once, arms out, and the movement stirred dust that glittered in sunlight. Each particle drifted in unpredictable paths, no longer bound to perfection. He laughed again, louder this time, a sound breaking under the enormity of its own existence. The laugh tore through him like light through darkness, raw and unrefined. It was not joy alone. It was disbelief, relief, and all tangled together into one uncontainable outburst. The air received it eagerly, rippling as though every molecule had been waiting centuries just to remember how to tremble. Above him, the sky seemed to answer. A low, resonant hum rolled through the heavens, not thunder, but something older, gentler, like the deep vibration of the world's own chest rediscovering how to draw a breath. The sun shivered in its suspended orbit. Clouds loosened, uncertain but willing to drift again. Light moved, bending across the ground like a smile slowly remembered. The hum beneath Aaron's feet deepened, weaving itself into melody. It was imperfect, unsteady. Its rhythm stumbled and hesitated, but it was music nonetheless. Unstructured, human, alive. He sank to his knees, trembling as a realization swept through him. The stillness was breaking, dissolving into motion once more. He could feel it everywhere, in the whispering grasses that had just remembered how to sway, in the soft quake of the earth beneath him, in the first true wind of the new world brushing his face. And within that wind, within that pulse, within that impossible rebirth, he felt her. Vetra, not as before, not a goddess made of flesh and flame, nor a voice from beyond the veil of time. She was diffused now, infinite and everywhere, the breath itself, the exhale that carried warmth back into creation, the sigh between seconds, the heartbeat hidden beneath every motion, every beginning, every pause. He lifted his face toward the horizon, voice shaking as though afraid it might break the fragile music of rebirth. "You did it," he whispered. "You breathed the world back." The wind answered, soft as touch, curling around with warmth that wasn't air but memory, fingers of motion stroking his hair, tracing his cheek. It carried her voice, delicate yet steady, woven to the hum of existence itself. "No," the wind whispered, a tone between love and laughter. "We did." The words rippled outward, filling the air with resonance. Even the stones seemed to vibrate in agreement. Aaron bowed his head, overcome. Tears spilled freely now, sliding down his face not as symbols of grief, but as offerings. They struck the ground and vanished, not frozen, not caught midair, but absorbed. The soil drank them eagerly, as though thirsty for human imperfection. For centuries the world had known only divine symmetry, mechanical balance. Now it was hungry for the beautiful irregularity of mortal feeling. He smiled through the blur, voice cracking as he spoke to the trembling earth. "Then breathe with me." The ground beneath him seemed to pulse in reply, slow and deep. And then, quietly, reverently, the world inhaled. The air swelled with warmth, expanding in a long, shuddering gasp. Across the horizon, color bled back into being. Soft greens, hesitant golds, blues reborn from the memory of oceans. The first true wind swept over the plains, carried with it the scent of wet soil, of distant rain, of the impossible fact of motion. From horizon to horizon, the silence shattered, not with noise, but with life. Aaron felt it before he heard it, the rhythmic beating of wings overhead. Birds, tentative at first, testing their remembered flight. One called out, its cry unsteady but pure. Another answered, then another. Birdsong hesitated, then found courage. Each note was a declaration. We are still here. Down by the shore, the glassy sea convulsed. Waves gathered, unsure, and broke unevenly against the rocks. They stumbled, reformed, and broke again, tasting their shores like a child relearning to speak. The air glittered with salt and light. The clouds, those silent watchers that had forgotten how to move, drifted once more, uneven and glorious, their shapes dissolving and reforming in clumsy wonder. And somewhere within that motion, Aaron swore he heard laughter, hers, echoing across the currents, blending with wind and surf until there was no separation between divinity and breath. Time itself staggered. It tripped over its own return, falling to its knees before finding its balance again. Seconds flickered uncertainly. Moments overlapped like waves colliding until rhythm emerged, broken, fragile, but undeniably there. The world began to walk again. Aaron rose to his feet slowly, afraid to move too fast and frighten the miracle away. He looked around, and the sight brought fresh tears to his eyes. The landscape was the same, and yet utterly new. Trees glimmered with dew that had never existed before. The air was alive with small, accidental harmonies. Every sound, every flutter, every whisper was imperfect, and that imperfection was proof that creation had survived. He spread his arms, feeling the pulse of the air against his skin, and breathed deeply. The breath came out as laughter again, unstoppable, resonant, overflowing. It was a laugh big enough to fill the sky. And this time, the sky laughed with him. The clouds broke into radiant gold. The sea reflected its applause in shimmering waves. The wind joined in, spiraling upward until the whole world seemed to sing, not in chorus, but in glorious discord. Aaron's laughter dissolved into quiet wonder. He looked upward, where the light danced like living thought, and whispered. It wasn't much. He smiled, watching the sky shift from silver to soft blue, watching the world try to remember its rhythm. But it's beginning. He took another breath, deep, trembling, human. The air filled him with warmth and ache and memory. He closed his eyes and let it all move through him. The sound of rivers remembering their flow, the trembling of mountains as they sighed back into being, the faint heartbeat of time steadying its pace. And for the first time since eternity had stopped, Aaron exhaled without fear. He looked toward the newborn horizon, uneven, radiant, alive, and whispered almost himself. And this time it will remember how. The wind answered in laughter and light, echoing her voice through the dawn of the world reborn. It already does. The air trembled faintly, almost imperceptibly, as if the frozen reality had heard him, for a heartbeat, a metaphor, because time itself no longer flowed. He felt a suggestion of warmth like a sigh too shy to form. He closed his eyes and tried to count the seconds. None came. Counting required progression, and progression was gone. What he had instead were impressions, blinks of awareness, pearls strung not by order but by meaning. He remembered the first clock he had seen as a child, a brass pendulum swinging in his grandfather's workshop. He remembered its hypnotic motion and the comfort of predictability. Now he understood the lie of that rhythm. It was not time that moved, but belief. He smiled. Even stillness has its pulse, he said aloud. Somewhere deep in the silence, something responded, a faint hum, like the echo of the world remembering its own heartbeat. The air shimmered slightly, and for an instant, the shadow of a wave rolled to the ocean of still light. Then it vanished again. Aaron realized that the universe wasn't dead. It was paused, waiting for the right memory to restart it. So he began to remember deliberately. He remembered the smell of rain and the laughter of markets. He remembered the warmth of Sigrid's stories, the rhythm of his words bending the air. He remembered Vetra's hand in his, her voice saying, "All things end so that they can begin again." Each memory he invoked left traces, small distortions in the frozen air, lines of motion etched into the stillness like brushstrokes. The sky flickered faintly, blue darkening at the edges. The sun blinked once more, a tremor of light crossing its surface. He felt a tear form on his cheek. It didn't fall. It simply hung there, a jewel of suspended grief. Yet even that tiny imperfection was movement, a rebellion against eternity. Aaron whispered to the unmoving horizon, "You're waiting for her, aren't you?" The silence answered with a warmth that wasn't warmth, a pulse without sound. It was everywhere at once, the world's hell breath aching for release. He knew then what Vetra had done. Her song hadn't destroyed time. It had gathered it, condensed every heartbeat, every dawn, every death into this single, perfect stillness. She had made the universe pause, not to end, but to listen. And now, it was waiting for him to finish the verse. He stood tall beneath the motionless sun. The air around him shimmered with fragments of memory, 1,000 faces, 1,000 futures. Each one glowed faintly, like stars trying to ignite in daylight. Aaron took a breath that had no beginning or end. "You remember me," he said softly. "So, I'll remember you." He closed his eyes and thought of motion, not as escape, but as grace. He pictured the smallest possible gesture, a single leaf falling. He felt the weight of that image grow, pulling gently against the fabric of stillness. And somewhere, deep inside the paused machinery of reality, a sound like a sigh began to echo. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even certain. But it was enough. The tear on his cheek slipped downward. Time had moved, barely, but truly. Aaron opened his eyes. The sun looked exactly the same, yet he knew it had shifted, an imperceptible fraction, the width of forgiveness. He smiled through the shimmer of frozen light. "That's it," he whispered. "Just breathe." He took another step. This one made ripples. Everywhere he walked, color returned. Faint greens and grass, distant blues at the horizon. The world began to thaw, not in heat, but in possibility. Each breath he took was another tick of the clock that was no longer made of gears, but of memory remembered. He had lived 1,000 moments inside one heartbeat, and now the heartbeat wanted to move again. When he turned back, the air behind him shimmered with traces of his path. Stories, laughter, fragments of all he had loved. They did not vanish. They lingered, forming constellations of remembrance across the frozen sky. And for the first time since silence began, the sun blinked twice. It was subtle, no more than a twitch in the eyelid of eternity. But it was enough for Aaron to know that time, like a reluctant god, was waking. He breathed once more, a soundless exhale that carried warmth through the still air. "Welcome back," he said to everything and nothing. The horizon pulsed faintly in reply. It was not movement yet, only intent, but in that intent lay the promise of days to come. Aaron smiled and began to walk again, knowing that every step he took was another second reborn. And far above, the sun trembled once, just enough for its light to change angle, an infinitesimal dawn in a world learning to turn again. The silence had lasted so long that it had ceased to feel like absence. It had texture now, smooth and infinite, like glass stretched over the horizon. Aaron had walked through that stillness until walking itself became something abstract, a gesture repeated by instinct rather than need. No wind, no shadow, no pulse of sun. Even his thoughts began to echo without moving. Then, impossibly, he heard something move. At first it was so faint that he mistook it for memory, a whisper half remembered from a dream, the phantom pulse of time trying to restart. But it grew, a sound with direction, with purpose, a single trickle of water, threading through the dead calm like a vein of living light. He froze, afraid that acknowledging it aloud might break it. The air around him remained still, yet the sound resisted, a delicate, liquid rhythm, unafraid of silence. He followed. The thread of sound. Every step he took toward the sound seemed to unmake the world behind him. The ground melted from frosted water, then froze again once he passed. It was as though existence was reconstructing itself around his attention. The trickle grew clearer, its tone crystalline, steady. He realized it wasn't just water. It carried music. Beneath its whisper was the echo of a melody, faint but familiar, each note repeating as though it had waited for millennia to be heard again. "Vetra," he whispered, the name fragile on his tongue. The melody responded, not louder, but closer. The world trembled with the faintest shimmer of light. It wasn't sight. It was memory recognizing its source. He walked faster. Around him, fragment of reality began to appear in patches. A stone here, a fragment of grass there, brief moments of color bleeding through the eternal grayscale. Wherever the sound led, life began to follow. To the place of echoes. After what might have been moments, or eternities, he reached the source. A vast hollow lay before him, carved into what once might have been a valley or a wound in the world. In its center stood a pool of water, small but impossibly luminous, rippling even in the absence of wind. Around it lay ruins made of light, pillars, arches, fragment of something half temple, half memory. He approached cautiously. The trickle of water fed the pool from a single crack in the air itself, a fissure in reality where sound and light leaked from beyond. From that crack came the melody, repeating endlessly, a few haunting notes from Vetra's final song. Aaron knelt beside the pool. The water was warm, shimmering with reflections that weren't his own. Within it, he saw faces and moments, fragments of the past that had not been completely erased. Vetra's song was still here, caught like sunlight trapped in dew. The melody wove through him, slow and deliberate, neither mournful nor joyful. It was simply present, carrying every emotion without surrendering to any. He closed his eyes, letting it fill him. Each note became a direction, a pull across unseen coordinates. The music wasn't repeating, it was pointing. He understood it then, not as sound, but as a map. Her song was guiding him through the ruins of eternity. 3. The map of light. When he opened his eyes, the world had changed again. Lines of light stretched outward from the pool, forming paths across the air, current of golden thread weaving into the distance. They pulsed faintly, as though echoing a heartbeat that no longer belonged to either God or man. Aaron rose, following the first thread. It curved upward into the sky, dissolving into mist before forming ahead. A breadcrumb trail made a harmony. He stepped onto it, and the world beneath his feet dissolved entirely. The sound of the trickling water faded behind him, replaced by the faint hum of the melody, transforming into something vaster. He was walking through Vetra's memory. Everywhere he looked, fragments floated, shards of moments from before time fractured. He saw gods of their first dawn, shaping stars with laughter. He saw mortals building fires from the dust of fallen comets. He saw Sigrid stories written across the sky in lines of flame that never cooled. Each fragment drifted by like a constellation torn from its place, glowing softly before fading. Vetra's voice, echo, essence, memory, guided him between them. He began to understand the pattern. The melody wasn't random. It charted the remnants of the universe like landmarks. There was rhythm where there should have been nothing, a cartography of song. 4. The wreckage of eternity. He followed the threads through places no longer places, corridors of frozen lightning, plains made of glass, fields of suspended rain. Each fragment shimmered with potential, waiting to be remembered. Sometimes he walked through whole cities frozen in their final seconds, streets filled with statues that had once been people, faces still twisted in awe or terror. He touched one and felt the ghost of laughter trapped beneath the surface, still warm after millennia. He whispered to them, "She remembered you," and the air stirred slightly, as if the world sighed in relief. The melody grew more complex, interweaving harmonies that spoke of direction and emotion both. He realized that her song didn't simply map the ruins. It healed them as he passed. Every place he crossed brightened, restored for a heartbeat before fading again. It was as if he was walking through a living prayer. But prayers are exhausting things. Each note pressed heavier upon him, the light around his chest burning brighter, as though his body had begun to absorb the remnants of what she'd left behind. He understood then. This journey wasn't meant to bring him to her. It was meant to make him remember everything she had known. The chamber of still suns. After ages of walking, he reached a dome suspended in void. Inside, hundreds of suns hung frozen mid-flare, their light tangled together like roots of fire. The melody led him here, its volume steady, its meaning profound. At the center of the dome floated a sphere of darkness, small but impossibly dense. It pulsed faintly, each beat shaking the suns around it into a whisper of motion. The moment he stepped closer, he felt her presence everywhere. "Vetra," he breathed. The darkness brightened slightly in answer. Her voice, faint, scattered, not entirely language, filled the space around him. "You followed the sound." He smiled, tears falling though they froze midair. "I couldn't do anything else. The song was never meant for me," she said. "It was a memory of movement, left for whoever still believed in beginning again." He stepped closer. "You left a map. I left a rhythm. The difference is what makes you human." He laughed softly through tears. "I don't understand." "You don't have to. Just listen." The melody shifted again, wrapping around him like light caught in water. Every note she had ever sung played backward and forward at once, an entire life folding into harmony. He saw within it, scattered through eons, Vetra's goddess mortal flame reflection. The totality of her existence spun around him like the orbits of memory. Then she spoke again, softer. There's something left to rebuild. The song can't do it alone. It needs a listener who remembers not just what was lost, but why it was worth losing. Aaron knelt. Then, teach me. 6. The memory of breath. Light poured from the suspended suns, flooding the chamber in waves. Each ray carried a whisper, a fragment of her song transformed into words he could almost understand. He listened. Each phrase reminded him of a moment. Sigrin's laughter, the frozen river, the bridge built from silence, the horologer's broken perfection. He realized these were not just recollections. They were instructions. Memory is not backward, he murmured. It's the shape the future takes before it knows itself. The melody deepened in agreement. He began to hum with it, hesitant at first, then stronger. The sound filled the emptiness, merging with hers until it was no longer clear who was guiding whom. The suns trembled, one by one. They began to move again, their frozen flares unfurling like petals. The void around him shimmered into dawn. The sphere of darkness, Vetra's core, her last silence, brightened until it became transparent. Through it, he saw the reflection of the ocean where she had fallen, still rippling in endless repetition. Follow the rhythm, she whispered. Don't chase me. Chase the echo. He understood. The trickle of water, the song, the threads of light, all of it had been preparing him to find the pulse hidden in stillness. The clock of the world had broken. But memory, hers, theirs, was building a new one. 7, the long return. When he stepped out of the dome, the sky was no longer empty. The threads of light had converged behind him into a single vast spiral, rotating slowly like a galaxy forming from forgotten prayers. He looked back once, expecting silence, but the sound of the trickling water had returned, soft, persistent, alive. It no longer came from behind him. It came from within. He touched his chest and felt the pulse, not his heart, not time, but the music of her memory beating through him. The melody she'd sung into the world had taken root inside his veins. He laughed through tears. You're still guiding me. The wind answered, faint but present, brushing across his face like fingers tracing his memory. He followed the new sound, the rhythm now embedded in his breath. Everywhere he walked, color returned. The grass bent again in wind. The clouds began to move. The sun remembered a shift in the sky. He no longer needed the map. The map had become him. 8, the awakening of motion. As he walked, the melody changed once more. It no longer mourned. It quickened, alive with uncertainty, with asymmetry, the rhythm of life rediscovering itself. Rivers began to flow again. The frozen oceans groaned as they remembered how to rise and fall. Trees shed old ice and began to blossom, their petals drifting upward before learning to fall correctly. Each step he took rewrote a law of existence. He reached a hill where the horizon bled light into shadow, and for the first time since eternity fractured, he saw time move. The sun sank, not perfectly, but bravely. It trembled as though afraid of its own imperfection, and Aaron laughed aloud, a sound so alive that the world echoed it back. See, he said to the air, even endings can learn to breathe. The trickle of water behind him had become a river now, flowing into distance. The melody wove through its current, softer but unbroken. It wasn't Vetra's song anymore. It was his, shaped by memory yet different enough to belong to the future. 9, the horizon remade. He followed the river until it reached a place where the sky folded over itself, a boundary once impassable. Now it shimmered, translucent, breathing in time with his heartbeat. Aaron stood before it, uncertain. Beyond lay nothing, pure potential, unformed and waiting. The melody inside him quieted to a hum, a reminder rather than a command. He whispered, "Is this it? The end." A voice, not separate from him, but arising from every atom of air, answered gently, "The end is just where memory takes its first breath." He smiled. "Then I'll start again." He stepped forward into the horizon, and the world unfolded with him. The stars rearranged themselves into new constellations. Rivers bent in directions they had never known. The air itself exhaled, releasing centuries of hell breath. And beneath it all, the melody continued. No longer an echo of Vetra's song, but its evolution. X, the song that remains. Aaron paused once more, looking back. The world behind him glowed like an unfinished painting. Brushstrokes of dawn and dusk mixing freely, unafraid of contradiction. It was imperfect, asymmetrical, alive. He felt her presence everywhere, not as a voice or vision, but as rhythm, in the sway of trees, in the heartbeat of the sea, in the uneven flicker of stars daring to blink out of sync. He whispered, "You made me your echo." The wind replied, gentle and amused, carrying a phrase that wasn't quite words, but close enough for him to understand. "No, I made you my continuation." He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of moving air, the hum of flowing water, the uneven rhythm of a world reborn. He began to hum again, softly, letting the melody rise from his chest, mixing with hers until neither could be separated. The river carried their song across the horizon, through mountains that hadn't yet learned their names, across skies still painting themselves into existence. And the sound of that song became the heartbeat of time once more, fragile, resilient, never perfect, always becoming. The ice stretched to the ends of the world, a cathedral of frozen light, vast and hollow, shimmering with all the silence the universe had left. The sky above was still pale with the memory of Vetra's last song, and the air held its echo like a ghost refusing to fade. The sun hung unmoving in the white expanse, neither rising nor setting, only waiting. Aaron stood at the heart of it all, barefoot on the glacier, his breath a faint mist that refused to drift away. The world had not yet decided whether to live or end. Every sound, even the beating of his heart, seemed too loud, too alive for this tomb of light. He had followed her melody here, across the still plains where even thought moved slowly, drawn by the invisible pulse that whispered beneath the quiet. He knew what he had to do, though he could not explain how he knew. Perhaps her song had left the instructions in his bones. Perhaps memory itself had chosen him to finish what she had begun. The air trembled faintly, as if listening. "Vetra," he whispered, his voice small in the endless cold. "You gave yourself to wake the world. Let me give it shape." He pulled a knife from his belt, the same blade that had once torn the gears from a god. Its edge was dull now, but the metal still hummed faintly with memory. He turned it against his palm. The skin parted easily, pain sharp and honest. Blood welled, warm and bright, startling against the glassy ice. For a moment, he simply stared, that color, that motion, a reminder that life had not been erased completely. Then he knelt and pressed his hand to the frozen ground. The red spread, branching like roots across the surface. Where it touched, the ice seemed to awaken, lines of faint light forming beneath. He began to carve. "I," the first line. He drew the blade through his blood and ice, cutting shapes that weren't quite letters but carried rhythm. The cadence of her song translated into form. Each movement of his hand released a faint hum, a pulse that vibrated to the glacier and vanished into the air. He carved her name first, not the sound, but the meaning, she who chose to remember. The ice responded with light, the rune glowing faintly, as if approving. Then he carved the story. He etched her descent into the circular ocean, each stroke a memory, her leap, her stillness, her song. The lines wove outward like veins, spiraling across the frozen surface. Every motion he made seemed to stir the world a little. Faint cracks appearing in the distance, air shifting slightly, a sigh returning to the lungs of creation. The deeper he cut, the more the ice began to sing back to him. Soft notes rising from the fractures, harmonizing with his heartbeat. It wasn't just sound, it was her presence. "She's watching," he murmured, or maybe listening. Blood dripped steadily from his hand, staining the white ground with life. He didn't stop. 2, the memory written in pain. Hours passed, or maybe centuries. There was no measure left. Aaron carved through numbness, through exhaustion, through the faint trembling of his body, remembering hunger and warmth and love. Every cut brought new visions. In the ice, reflections bloomed, fragment of Vetra's face, her smile beneath the frozen aurora, her eyes filled with both mercy and mourning. He carved faster, chasing the fading images, trying to hold him in the shapes of his wounds. Around him, the glacier began to glow faintly from within. The lines he cut formed rivers of red light that pulsed in rhythm with the faintest heartbeat. Not his own, not hers, but the world's. The air stirred again, carrying a sound, not quite a voice, not yet the wind, but the breath before speech. He paused, panting. "I can't stop," he whispered to the ice. "If I stop, you'll fade again." The knife trembled in his hand. He carved deeper, writing the last verse of her story. The moment she sang the world still. The blade bit through layers of time itself, the ice beneath glowing brighter until it became transparent. Through it, he saw movement, faint ripples beneath the surface. Water, liquid, flowing. His heart leapt. The glacier wasn't endless. It was sleeping. 3. The breaking of stillness. He pressed his bloodied hand against the glowing ice and whispered, "Wake up." For a moment, nothing, then a crack. It began small, almost shy, a hairline fracture running through the lines he'd carved. The sound was the first real sound the world had made since she'd gone, brittle and miraculous. He smiled through tears. "That's it. Breathe." The crack widened, light spilling through. The ground trembled under his knees, the hum of the ice deepening into something alive. And then the air moved. It started as a whisper, curling around him like fingers tracing old memories. The temperature changed, not warmer, but different, charged with the friction of rebirth. The stillness that had suffocated the horizon began to unravel. The sound of air against air, wind, swept across the plains, carrying the faintest melody. Her melody, Vetra's voice. 4. The return of the wind. It came softly at first, like someone exhaling after centuries of silence. It brushed his hair, tugged gently at his sleeve, circled him with invisible grace. Then it spoke. "You wrote me back." Arin froze, eyes wide. "Vetra." The wind laughed, a sound halfway between breath and light. It wasn't exactly her voice, but it was herself, the essence that had become part of the air, carried now by everything that could move. "You remembered me," she said. "So I remembered you." He fell to his knees, sobbing. "I thought you were gone." "I was," she whispered, "until you gave me shape." The wind swirled around the carvings, lifting snow and dust, filling each room with her breath. The ice glowed brighter, veins of red and gold pulsing outward from the heart of his work. "You bled to write," she said. "You gave memory a body again." "I just wanted you to live," he whispered. "I do. In the sound between moments, in the air you breathe." He closed his eyes, letting the wind surround him. Every gust carried fragments of her song, fragments that wove together, building harmony again. The sun above trembled. Shadows flickered for the first time in eternity. Time, cautious and uncertain, began to breathe. The slow pulse. It wasn't sudden. It was shy, hesitant, a trembling inhale after too long without lungs. Arin felt it before he saw it. The faint pulse beneath his feet, the rhythm of existence finding its courage. The cracks in the ice widened, not destructively but gently, like skin stretching after sleep. The wind grew stronger, circling the horizon. Clouds shifted, reforming. The sun blinked, a heartbeat of light returning to the cycle. Vetra's voice moved through it all, weaving melody into motion. "Every age begins with blood and memory," she said. "You gave both. Now the world remembers how to turn." He watched as the glacier began to melt, slow, deliberate, like a curtain lifting. Beneath it, rivers awoke, carrying the red of his blood downstream. Where they touched the earth, grass began to grow, trembling at first, then swaying in rhythm with the wind. Color seeped into the world. Faint greens, soft golds, shy blues. The sky sighed, reshaping itself. And Arin, tired, trembling, alive, laughed through his tears. The sound was rough, cracked, unsteady, yet it carried the clarity of rebirth. "You did it again," he said to the wind, his voice breaking under the weight of wonder. "You started time twice." The air brushed his face in reply. Tender as a kiss, soft as the sigh of a newly woken child. The warmth of that touch lingered against his skin. "No." she said, her voice woven through the wind. We did. Her words trembled through him, through the glacier, through the world still learning to move. He stood slowly, the ache in his muscles mingling with a warmth that was not physical but remembered, a trace of light in his blood. The crimson stains on his fingers had darkened, dry into runes that glimmered faintly when he moved. The carvings at his feet, those desperate inscriptions made in pain and faith, were glowing now like constellations scattered across the earth. Each rune sang softly to itself, and together they formed a vast harmony. The song was her story, and his heartbeat kept its rhythm. He knelt and traced one with his hand. The moment his skin touched the groove, the sound deepened, rich and resonant. It echoed through the air, through the ice, through every breath of wind around him. Every cut he had made had become a memory. Every drop of blood had turned into a syllable of creation, and together they spoke a truth so ancient it felt newborn. He understood now. He had not resurrected her. There was no resurrection to be made. She had transformed. She was not in one place, but in all, distributed across existence like warmth through water. Vetra had become the wind, yes, but he had given the wind direction. A gust rose suddenly, playful and swirling, circling him like laughter given form. It tugged at his cloak, lifted snow from the ground, braided light through his hair. "Do you hear it?" she asked. He listened. The heartbeat. "No," she said gently. The hesitation. That's life. Even gods must learn to stumble again. Aaron closed his eyes, smiling through exhaustion. "Then I'll stumble with you." The wind quieted, a contented hush falling over the world. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time was reassembling itself, relearning sequence after eternity's pause. The horizon shimmered as colors returned, hesitant at first, as though light had to recall its purpose. The white sky shifted to blue. Blue softened into violet. Violet blushed into orange. The first honest dawn the world had seen since the silence. The sun, uncertain but willing, began its slow ascent, inch by inch across the sky, still deciding how to hold it. The glacier beneath Aaron sighed. The sound was deep, resonant, old, like memory rediscovering lungs. Cracks blossomed across the ice, not as fractures but as veins. Beneath them, rivers stirred, restless and newborn, tugging at the edges of their prison. Aaron walked toward one. He knelt at the bank as the water broke through the ice, flowing outward in silver ribbons that caught the uncertain light. He dipped his hands into it, washing away the blood. The red dissolved into the current, swirling like paint until the river carried it forward, leaving streaks of rose behind, reflections of the world's first sunset before the first evening had even arrived. He smiled faintly. "Even my wounds want to travel," he whispered. Everywhere around him, motion returned. Snowflakes began to fall, not the silent, sterile snow of the still age, but snow that melted as it landed, feeding the rivers below. Far off, thunder rumbled, tentative, like a memory rehearsing itself before performance. Aaron tilted his head, listening. "You're in everything," he said softly. "And you," she answered, her voice faint but filled with warmth, "are the reason everything moves." He laughed, the sound carried gently by the wind. "Then I suppose we're both parts of the same clock again." "No clocks," she said, "only breaths." He inhaled deeply. The air entered his lungs not as air but as light, alive, fragrant, alive with the scent of rain yet to fall. Each breath he took was another turn of the world. When the sky dimmed into the first true dusk, Aaron returned to the place where he had carved her name, the epicenter of rebirth. The light beneath the ice was steady now, no longer wild or fragile, but calm and sure, the color of memory rather than fire. He stood there for a long time, gazing at the soft glow underfoot, the whispers of wind above him, the horizon bending gently toward rest. Then, slowly, he drew the knife again. Its blade reflected not steel, but the faint shimmer of stars just beginning to awaken. "One more," he murmured. "Just one more." He pressed the blade to his palm once more, feeling the familiar sting, the warmth spreading outward in deliberate gravity. Blood welled up, dark and sacred. He crouched beside her name and carved a circle around it, unbroken, endless, perfect in its imperfection. Within that circle, he inscribed a single rune, an ancient mark that meant continuation. The blood flowed into the grooves, lighting them from within. The glow expanded outward, connecting the other carvings, linking them in lines of light until the whole plane seemed alive, a lattice of stories breathing as one. The air shimmered. The wind hesitated, pausing mid-motion, as though watching. Then, in the smallest, most intimate voice, Vetra whispered through the air, "It's done." Aaron exhaled. Something immense and tender moved through the fabric of existence. Not divine, not mechanical, but profoundly human. It was the pulse of time learning its rhythm again, of reality, relearning how to dream. He felt it beneath his skin, in the ground, in the stars. The universe was breathing, slowly, deliberately, on its own. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed, exhausted, smiling through tears. The wind brushed past him one final time, gentle and playful, lifting the snow into small spirals that danced around him before dissolving into the dark. Above, the sky deepened into its first true night. The stars blinked, hesitant at first, as though uncertain of their timing. One by one, they found courage, their light gathering into constellations never seen before. Aaron lay back on the ice and watched them, the knife still in his hand, the warmth of his blood cooling into peace. The stars were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of beginning. He smiled, eyes half-lidded. "Rest now," he whispered to the sky, to her, to himself. "I'll keep the rhythm." The world seemed to lean closer, listening. The air around him softened, humming with approval, with gratitude. Somewhere beyond hearing, the glacier exhaled, a long, slow sigh that rolled across the valleys like the earth itself learning how to breathe again. It was deep, resonant, full of warmth. It reached rivers and stones, roots and clouds, the edges of existence where silence once ruled. And as it traveled, it carried life with it, the first breath of the living world. Aaron felt it wash over him, through him. He closed his eyes and smiled. The hum deepened into a heartbeat. The wind paused to listen. The stars brightened, shimmering like tears on eternity's face. The universe had begun to move, not in perfection, but in rhythm. The world's first true breath filled the silence, and in its pulse was everything that would ever be born. The laughter of children, the sorrow of endings, the courage of creation daring to begin again. Aaron's last thought before sleep was a quiet certainty. They had not saved the world. They had taught it to remember itself. And that, he knew, was enough. The rebirth of motion did not come like thunder. It came like forgiveness. The silence that had ruled since Vetra's song faded began to unravel, slowly, gently, as though afraid to startle existence back into fear. What began as a tremor beneath Aaron's hand became a sigh through the stone, then a pulse through the ice, and finally, a rhythm that the world recognized as its own heart returning. He stood atop the glacier that had been his altar, the runes of blood still glowing faintly beneath his feet. Around him, the air shimmered with warmth that wasn't heat, but memory taking breath. Then the ground moved. Aye! The uprising of the earth. From a horizon, a low rumble began. Soft at first, then steady, like an exhale held for eons finally released. The mountains, long bowed under the weight of eternity, began to rise again. Their ascent was not violent. It was reverent. The peaks lifted slowly, stretching toward the newborn sky, carried with them the echo of ancient prayers buried in their stone. Snow cascaded down their sides in glittering avalanches of light. Aaron watched in awe as ridgelines unfolded like pages being rewritten. Valleys yawned open, no longer wounds but cradles. Caves breathed for the first time, releasing trapped whispers of extinct winds. From their depths came the first tremors of the rivers. The frozen waterways cracked, their surfaces splitting into veins of light and movement. Water hesitated, remembering stillness before remembering flow. It rolled forward uncertainly, like a child learning to walk, stumbling, pausing, then laughing with motion. Every drop shimmered faintly, glowing with colors unseen before, for these rivers remembered everything. They carried the reflections of what had been lost. Faces of gods, fragments of broken dawns, voices of mortals whose names had vanished. Wherever the waters flowed, life began to hum. 2. The return of the stars. Night came, awkwardly and perfectly, but it came. The sky, once locked in perpetual noon, dimmed into a bruised twilight. The first star appeared not as a point of light, but as a question mark etched in silver, as if heaven itself wasn't entirely sure how to begin again. Then another, and another. Each one pulsed, faintly uneven, until the firmament resembled the beating of 1,000 unsteady hearts. These were not the same stars that had once ruled the heavens. Those had died with the first ending. These were remade, their light threaded through with echoes of memory. They flickered in patterns that told stories. Constellations no longer marked destiny. They marked remembrance. Travelers who would one day walk beneath them would see not gods in their shapes but lives, a mother's hands weaving cloth, a child's laughter turned into light, a man's promise kept across centuries. The stars themselves hummed faintly, a quiet resonance that joined the rhythm of rivers and the breathing of mountains. For the first time since time's fracture, the universe had music again. 3. The hum beneath the living. The pulse of memory spread through all things. It seeped into roots, into soil, into the quiet between heartbeats. The trees awakened first. Their leaves quivered though there was no wind, each one glowing faintly along its veins. They began to rustle in tones that weren't mere sound but recollection, the soft murmurs of forests long fallen, storms long past, birds long extinct. Animals emerged next, blinking into the dim light with confusion and wonder. Deer stepped cautiously into thawing meadows, pausing as if listening to something beneath the earth. Wolves howled, and their echoes carried not just hunger but recognition. Aaron watched them, his chest tightening with emotion. The hum was everywhere now, soft but unmistakable, a vibration through all matter, the heartbeat of what had been lost now woven into the living. Every creature carried it differently. Some sang it, some breathed it, some simply existed with it glowing quietly beneath their skin. And as dawn returned, fragile, unpracticed, the hum deepened into harmony. Even the smallest insects moved with rhythm, their wings tracing invisible runes in the air. Each motion was a memory rediscovered. 4. The dreams of mortals. The humans came later, crawling from the edges of silence. Villages that had once turned to ash began to stir. From the ruins of temples and homes, mortals awoke, rubbing frost from their eyes. They did not remember dying, nor being born. They simply opened their eyes into a world already alive with remembrance. At first, they were afraid. The air shimmered with unseen whispers. The rivers spoke their names before they knew them. The stars pulsed in patterns that seemed to echo their own breathing. Then came the dreams. The first dreamer was a child, a girl who had fallen asleep beside a rekindled fire. She dreamed of holding a quill made of light, writing songs on water, and a woman with hair starlight, singing her into being. When she awoke, she told her mother, "I remembered before remembering." And her mother wept, though she did not know why. Soon, others dreamed too. Farmers saw themselves tending fields under skies that no longer existed. Sailors felt phantom waves rocking their bones, though no sea had yet returned. Lovers recognized each other not as strangers, but as halves reunited after a pause. The dreams were not visions. They were memories of other lives. Across the reborn lands, mortals began to speak in tones they had never learned. They built fires in the same patterns as ancient altars. They sang songs they could not have known, yet knew perfectly. The hum of the world had seated itself in their blood. V. The memory of water. Aaron walked along one of the new rivers, his reflection rippling with more faces than his own. Every time he blinked, he saw another version of himself. A boy by the ocean, a soldier in iron, a spirit whispering through frost. The river spoke to him, not in words, but in rhythm. Its current matched the pulse in his veins, as though both had been written by the same hand. He dipped his fingers into the flow. The water was cold, but within it was warmth, something like recognition. He whispered, "You remember her, don't you?" The river shimmered. For a moment, it stilled completely, and in that perfect reflection he saw her face, Vetra's, luminous and calm, smiling not as goddess but as presence. Her voice came through the current, soft as mist. The world hums because it finally knows how to listen. He bowed his head. And the dreams? Are they you? No, she answered. They are the echoes of what every soul left behind when time forgot them. I only gave the silence back its ear. Aaron closed his eyes. The hum deepened. He could feel it in everything. The song that connected life to memory, now inseparable. 6. The breath of the sky. As days, true days, unfolded, the sky found its rhythm again. The sun no longer hung still. It moved, slow and unsure, but determined. At night, the stars brightened, each pulse a heartbeat of recollection. Shooting stars became rare. Sacred events. Pieces of memory released back into the void to find new homes. Birds began to fly again, but differently. Their wings cut to the new air as if tracing invisible music, rising and falling to rhythms that no longer belonged to migration or instinct. They did not travel toward warmth. They followed melody. Across the valleys and the thawed rivers, their flocks moved in spirals, weaving patterns that resembled notation, measures of existence written across the endless sky. Each turn of their flight left faint echoes of color, trails that shimmered briefly and then dissolved into the aurora's slow breathing. Aaron sat upon a rise of new grass, watching them with a smile that trembled between joy and reverence. Even the sky remembers, he said softly, moored himself into the world. The wind, full of golden whisper, carried Vetra's faint reply, because it was built from our breath. The air rippled. He felt her presence in every current, in every tremor of motion. She was not gone. She had become distributed, spread across the structure of being itself. She was in the rivers that murmured their hymns to stone, in the stars that pulsed like heartbeats above the newborn world, in the mountains that dreamed of fire beneath their calm faces. She was in the sleep of every creature, in the moment before dawn when silence inhaled light. The universe had become her afterlife, and she wore it beautifully. Generations passed like tides, slow but certain. The descendants of those who survived the stillness lived in harmony with the hum that filled all things. Their hearts beat not only with blood but with record, each pulse an echo of an older rhythm that had once halted and now sang again. They began to realize that memory had fused with life. Each person carried faint traces of worlds before this one, flickers of knowledge without origin, gestures that seemed inherited from time itself. A woman might hum a tune no bard had ever written, yet every listener would swear they recognized it. A craftsman might carve a pattern into stone that no teacher had shown him, yet his hands moved as though remembering. Children murmur forgotten languages in their sleep, words that tasted like dawn and dust. Old men traced maps in the dirt, sketching coastlines that no longer existed, naming stars that had never risen in this sky. Some grew fearful of these echoes, calling them curses, phantoms of the past that should have stayed dead. But others, quieter and wiser, understood. They saw that these memories were roots, not chains. And from that understanding came the libraries of the living. They were not built of brick or parchment, but of tone and touch. The first was made by a woman who had dreamed of her dead mother, singing beneath the sea. When she awoke, she pressed her hands to the walls of her home and began to hum. The stone vibrated, capturing her memory in resonance. When her neighbors touched that same wall, they heard the melody faintly humming back, a voice without body, an emotion preserved in vibration. Soon, entire towns began to hum their stories into stone. Mountains became archives. Caverns echoed with chronicles. Wind carried whispers from one village to another, stringing the world together through frequency instead of distance. They no longer wrote with ink, but with presence. To remember something, one only needed to breathe it correctly. To teach, one sang. To pray, one listened. The people learned that remembering was not the opposite of living. It was a continuation of it, the soft rhythm beneath existence, the heartbeat of gratitude. One night, far from the hum of civilization, travelers camping on a plateau looked up and saw the stars moving. At first, they thought the heavens had lost their constellations. The old gods were gone. Their shapes no longer marked the sky. But as the travelers watched, the stars began to reform, not into beasts or kings, but into people. Each constellation mirrored a soul walking the earth below. Above every traveler, a soft light burned, pulsing faintly in rhythm with their breath. When one of them fell asleep, their star dimmed gently, its light swaying as if dreaming too. When a child was born, a new glimmer appeared overhead, trembling before finding its place among the rest. And when someone died, their star did not vanish. It simply drifted, blending into the fabric of night, its glow absorbed by the greater harmony. Aaron watched from a high mountain, his cloak pulled close, his eyes full of tears that sparkled like the constellations reborn. He understood at last. The heavens were no longer a realm above. They had become mirrors of below, a breathing archive of every heartbeat that ever was. He smiled through his tears and whispered. So the gods finally learned humility. The wind's reply was laughter, soft, warm, familiar. Time spiraled on. The long stillness became legend, then myth, then memory folded into lullabies. But its residue remained. Every child was born with a faint hum in their chest, a vibration so subtle that only mothers could feel it while holding them close. Doctors could not name it. Scholars could not measure it. Yet poets knew its truth. They called it Vetra's pulse. When a baby laughed, flowers opened faster, leaning toward the sound. When a person wept, rivers slowed as though to listen. Humanity had become the conscience of the living earth, each soul a note in the endless chord that memory played. And sometimes, on nights when the moon seemed to pause mid-arc, people climbed mountains to listen. There, among the still rocks and restless winds, they swore they could hear faint singing rising from the ground, a song older than speech, older than sorrow. They called it the breath beneath, and none realized it was her voice, still weaving through the veins of creation. But Aaron did. He always knew. The years touched him lightly. Time, out of respect, refused to rush him. His hair grew silver, his face lined not by decay but by experience. Each wrinkle a story, each breath an echo of her. His eyes carried constellations that did not belong to the old heavens, but to the new one they had built together. He wandered the changed lands often, tracing rivers that now sang instead of roared, touching trees that whispered when the wind passed through them. One evening he returned to the place where the world had once been ice. The glacier was gone, replaced by valleys and streams that curved like veins of light. The carvings he had made in blood were long melted, absorbed by soil and water. Yet when he pressed his hand to ground, he could still feel it. The hum, slow and steady, the heartbeat of everything continuing. He whispered, "Everything remembers." The wind brushed against his cheek, carrying the voice he loved, even forgetting his memory. He smiled. "And will it last this time?" "Nothing lasts," she answered, "but everything continues." He nodded. The truth of her words was not sad. It was merciful. To continue was not to repeat. It was to evolve. Night fell gently. The stars above began to shift again, their movement slow and tender, like someone rewriting a story they finally understood. New constellations formed. Not gods, not monsters, not heroes, but two figures twined together, dancing in endless orbit. A man and a woman carved from light. Aaron lay back on the grass, watching them spiral through the dark. His body was heavy with peace. The hum beneath him matched his pulse. The world, once shattered, was breathing evenly now. He closed his eyes. For the first time in countless ages, he slept. Not to escape, not a dream of loss, but to rest inside continuation. In the space between his dream and the wind's whisper, the universe exhaled once more, long and rhythmic. The mountains stood tall, their peaks glowing like lanterns. The rivers sang lullabies to the valleys they carved. The stars blinked gently, keeping time with the hearts that beat below. And in every living thing, from the smallest seed trembling in the soil to the oldest spirit drifting through starlight, a faint hum persisted. It was not loud. It did not seek to command or to prove. It simply was. The soft, eternal heartbeat of what was lost, now found again. And it would never be silent. The sky ripened with light that was not light, an opalescent shimmer blooming behind clouds that did not move. The air thickened, then softened, then began to fall apart. Each flake that descended was not ice, but memory crystallized, drifting like whispers returning home. The world hushed. Even the rivers, even the mountains, even the hum that had replaced silence held its breath. From the heart of that silver snowfall, Something began to take shape. At first, it was just a brightness, too tender for eyes accustomed to daylight. Then it grew denser, form threading through radiance, motion through stillness, until a figure stepped out from the storm, each step leaving behind a trail of dissolving stars. It was Vetra, but not as before. Aye, the storm returned. The flakes around her did not touch the ground. They circled her instead, drawn to her gravity like thoughts orbiting an idea too immense for speech. Each one glowed faintly with images, faces, moments, unfinished dreams, the collective memory of everything she had once held within her divine heart. Aaron stood on the plain below, watching as she descended through the silver haze. His chest tightened with awe and ache. He had imagined her return 1,000 times, but never like this. Not in the soft grandeur of snowfall, not in the quiet assertion of existence. She was neither goddess nor ghost, and yet entirely both. Her feet did not disturb the earth. Her presence was not weight, but meaning. The wind bent around her, not out of fear, but reverence. Her hair flowed like smoke beneath moonlight, her skin translucent as the surface of water. And her eyes, those impossible eyes, held every dawn that had never happened, all the mornings the world had missed before learning to breathe again. Within them shimmered potential. Every sunrise postponed, every forgiveness unspoken, every love that had died before it was born. Aaron felt himself tremble. "You came back," he whispered. The words vanished before they reached her, because she did not need to hear them. 2. The meeting without words. When she reached him, the snow stopped falling. It didn't end. It simply paused, suspended in air as if the universe itself had knelt to witness. They stood a few steps apart. Between them stretched not distance, but a residue of everything that had been done in the name of love and sacrifice. The air pulsed faintly, carrying echoes of her last song. She looked at him. Not through him, not at him, but into him, as though searching for the place where her own melody had taken root. He met her gaze, and in that instant, something deeper than recognition passed between them. There were no words to contain it. Language was too small, too brittle for this. It was not reunion. It was completion. Aaron's breath caught. Every wound, every ache, every joy he had ever known unfolded in the space between them. He saw their story replaying through the air, not as images, but as currents of light intertwining like rivers merging at last. He stepped forward. She mirrored the motion. When their hands met, the snowfall flared, silver turning briefly to gold, as if even the light remembered how to feel. Her touch was cool, then warm, then both at once, the sensation of eternity remembering the shape of a human pulse. Neither spoke, but the silence between them said everything. You found me. You became me. You never left. The world trembled around them, but they did not move. 3. The silence made sacred. The wind that once carried her song grew still. The hum that filled creation dimmed, as though the universe itself bowed its head in reverence. The silence that followed was not empty. It was alive, a sacred pause holding everything in balance. Aaron could feel it pressing gently against his skin, against his heartbeat, against the soft tremor of her hand in his. It was the same silence that had existed before the first word, before time dared to speak itself into being. In that silence, all stories ended. And in that silence, all beginnings waited. He felt tears rise, but they didn't fall. They hovered in the air, each one catching the silver light and glowing softly before dissolving into mist. Vetra's lips parted slightly, not to speak, but to breathe. And even that motion seemed like creation happening again. The wind returned, not as sound, but as understanding. The rivers below shifted direction, subtly aligning to the rhythm of their shared stillness. Mountains bowed under the weight of the moment. The stars above dimmed respectfully, their light curving inward as though peering closer. Aaron realized that the universe was listening. It wasn't listening to them. It was listening through them. The silence between them had become the new sacred language, the communion of all things rediscovering coherence. For the echo of what was never said. Vetra reached out, her fingers tracing the scar across Aaron's palm, the one that had bled her story into the ice. Her touch left faint light, like moonfire settling into flesh. He shivered. When she finally spoke, Her voice was almost indistinguishable from the wind. You carved me into the world. Now let me carve the world into you. Her hand rested against his chest, and warmth bloomed beneath it. Slow, deep, infinite. He felt the hum of the world rise to meet her touch, the resonance that connected rivers to stars, trees to memory, gods to mortals. Every heartbeat echoed the rhythm of her final song. He looked into her eyes and saw himself reflected there, not as man or myth, but as moment, brief, luminous, necessary. I thought you were gone, he whispered. Her answer was a smile that contained centuries. I was never gone. I was only waiting for silence to remember its purpose. He exhaled, trembling. And what purpose is that? To hold love steady until it learns how to move again. Aaron laughed softly, the sound fragile but alive. The silver snow swirled around them like a slow dance. V. The reunion of breath. They stood in that stillness for what could have been seconds or ages. It no longer mattered. Time had begun to spiral instead of flow, each heartbeat looping softly back upon itself before moving forward again. Vetra's form flickered, her divinity straining against her humanity, her memory struggling against mercy. The light around her pulsed in rhythm with the world's renewed heartbeat. Aaron placed his hands on her shoulders. You don't have to hold it all anymore. I do, she said gently, but not alone. She leaned forward until her forehead touched his. For a moment, all separation dissolved, between mortal and divine, between silence and song. The hum that had sustained creation shifted, harmonizing into something new, a duet. The rivers quickened, the stars blinked in sync. Even the air felt lighter, freer, as if the cosmos had exhaled a sigh of relief. Aaron could feel her inside him now, her pulse entwined with his. He wasn't sure if it was love or recognition, or whether, at the scale of eternity, there was even a difference. He whispered, So this is peace. No, she replied. This is continuation. 6. The snow becomes light. The storm began to change. The flakes no longer looked like silver. They became translucent radiant. Each one disintegrated into faint luminescence as it touched the ground, releasing whispers that echoed through the air. Fragments of forgotten prayers, laughter, promises once broken and now repaired. The snow was dissolving into light, and that light was remembering how to be warmth. Aaron and Vetra stood at the center of it all, at the quiet axis where creation gathered itself before choosing a direction. Around them, the air shimmered with warmth that wasn't heat, with motion that wasn't wind. It was a slow rebirth of weather, of balance, of mercy. The snow that had fallen for centuries began to dissolve, not melting but softening, turning from light into breath, from stillness into promise. Beneath their feet, the white crust broke open, revealing veins of soil so dark it glowed. From that earth rose the first green shoots, fragile yet certain, their color still deciding between gray and gold. Each blade trembled, as if unsure whether it belonged to the past or the future. Aaron knelt and touched one. It felt warm, alive with remembrance. You see, Vetra whispered, stepping back just slightly, her hand still twined with his. Even endings learn how to blossom. He looked up at her. Around her, the snow swirled upward, drawn to her pulse. It gathered like mist, curling into delicate spirals before settling above her head, shaping itself into a crown of luminous frost. Each flake shimmered, pulsing like a heartbeat, as if the storm itself bowed to her rebirth. You see, she said again, her voice a tender blend of music and memory. Even the storm remembers grace. Aaron looked around, overwhelmed by the changing world, the thawing air, the trembling ground, the faint hum in every breath. It's beautiful, he whispered. Vetra smiled, the expression small but infinite. It's remembering. The snow lifted once more, not as a storm now, but as confession. The world admitting what it had forgotten. When the last of the silver storm faded, only quiet remained, pure, vast, and shimmering. It was not the silence of loss or death anymore. It was the silence of presence, the stillness that exists before sound, holding everything tenderly inside itself. It was a kind of silence that waits for the next word, not because it fears it, but because it knows that waiting is part of speaking. The air was full, vibrating with potential. The frost on the ground exhaled. The rivers below hummed faintly, like chords being tuned for a song that had not yet been written. Aaron and Vetra stood within it, hands still joined. Around them, life began to move again, slowly, carefully, as though learning to walk after a long sleep. Their shadows stretched and folded across the softening earth, merging and separating with each pulse of light. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their silence was not an absence of words. It was a conversation older than language. Each heartbeat answered the other. Each breath was an agreement. They were not asking questions anymore. They were being the answers. The hum beneath their feet grew stronger, resonating through air, through soil, through the still fragile skeleton of a newborn world. It threaded through every current, every cloud, every unfurling leaf. The pulse of the universe ran through them both, binding them not as lovers or deities or opposites, but as two halves of a single remembering. Aaron looked at her, seeing not the goddess who had stopped time nor the ghost who had remade it, but the rhythm of existence embodied, the pause between creation and collapse. Vetra looked back, and in his mortal gaze, she saw the reason for all beginnings, the fragile courage of impermanence. They were mirrors now, each reflecting what the other had lost, each restoring what the other had forgotten. The silence deepened. It expanded outward, folding across the horizon like light poured into water. The world still once more, but this time, stillness did not mean stopping. It meant completeness. Rivers paused to admire their reflections before flowing again. The sky, remembering humility, let the first true wind pass through it, a sigh of joy disguised as weather. The mountains bowed under the weight of peace. Within that vast quiet, everything seemed to breathe together, and yet there was no urgency. The dawn took its time arriving. The light bent slowly, reverently, touching the land as though asking permission. This silence was sacred not because it was empty, but because it was full of breath, of meaning, of sound waiting to be born. Aaron could feel it pressing softly against his chest. The pulse of potential, the hush before laughter, the calm that follows forgiveness. He closed his eyes and let the silence fill him. It was the same stillness that had existed before the first heartbeat, before the first word, before time had learned to measure. And in that stillness, he understood. The universe was listening again, not to gods, not to destiny, but to itself. Vetra turned her face to the wind, her eyes half closed. Light shimmered along her hair, catching in strands that seemed woven from both dawn and dusk. She whispered, "Do you hear it?" Aaron smiled faintly. "I hear everything." "No," she said gently, her voice blending with the breeze. "You hear yourself. That's what the world always was, a single breath, echoing." The air trembled as though nodding. He looked down at their joined hands. Where her fingers touched his, faint light flowed into him. Not divine, not consuming, but human in its warmth. It spread through his veins, filling him with something that felt like memory, like love, like the promise that even gods envy. Continuation. He exhaled slowly. "And when this silence ends—" "It won't," she said. "It will only change shape." The wind rose, circling them like a slow dance. It lifted their hair, their garments, their breath. It gathered fragments of their voices, carrying them outward until they became part of the weather, part of the endless conversation between sky and sea, fire and frost. When it quieted, only a whisper remained, soft and eternal, spoken by no one and everyone at once. All beginnings remember their return. Aaron felt the words vibrate in his bones. He opened his eyes, and the world gleamed back at him, every color brighter than it had ever dared to be. The aurora spread across the horizon, painting the snow with motion. Rivers curved like veins of light, and from the soil rose a faint shimmer of tomorrow learning its own name. He smiled, eyes reflecting the dawn that had never happened, now happening everywhere at once. He turned to Vetra. She was watching him, not with distance, but with peace. The crown of snow still floated above her, flickering softly like a candle caught between breaths. He reached for her hand. She met it halfway. The warmth of their grasp rippled outward, a pulse that echoed through the world. The silence deepened, not as stillness but as heartbeat. The air shimmered, folding light and memory into one eternal rhythm. Arin squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back. They stood there until all distinctions blurred, until silence became music, and music became meaning, and meaning became breath. The world pulsed once, softly, and in that pulse, everything that had ever lived, river, mountain, child, dream, knew that the balance had returned. The silence around them glowed, breathing like a living heart. It would not break again. Not ever. And from that stillness, the universe began again and again and again. The world restarts, not with thunder nor flame, nor the shattering cry of angels falling from the firmament, but with a sound so gentle it might have been mistaken for breath. The air trembled once, a slow exhale, as if the universe itself had sighed in relief, and then motion returned. The first thing to move was light. It shimmered like spilled memory across the horizon, folding itself into color. The sky had been blank for centuries, a mirror that reflected nothing. Now it rippled with soft hues, ribbons of green and violet uncoiling from the cold. The aurora stirred, blinking awake like an old eye remembering how to dream. Arin watched it, his heart beating in quiet wonder. He could feel the pulse of creation beneath his feet, a rhythm not steady but alive, uneven, beautiful. Time had begun to move again, though it refused to travel in straight lines. It flowed in spirals now. Each moment curved backward before reaching forward, tracing invisible circles around the present. The air shimmered with their passage. Laughter from the future brushed against sighs from the past. The world was not marching but dancing, its rhythm imperfect, human. He smiled. She like that, he murmured. The wind agreed, curling softly around him. Vetra's voice, faint but ever-present, threaded into the texture of motion. Children were the first to notice the change. They were born with laughter that rang in harmony, notes that echoed faintly across time. When they giggled, flowers bloomed days before they were planted. When they cried, rain fell somewhere on the other side of the world, as if the sky itself could not bear their sorrow. Each child carried an echo, a whisper of something older than themselves. Some dreamed in languages no one had yet spoken. Others hummed tunes that predated the stars. Their parents, at first afraid, learned to listen instead of explain, because when the children laughed, they could hear history answering back. Old songs drifted on the wind again. Forgotten scents, cedar and myrrh, salt and thunder, filled the air. The soil, long dormant, pulsed with buried memory. Seeds sprouted that had never existed before, plants that glowed faintly at dusk, their veins lit by the memory of moonlight. The animals, too, remembered. Birds traced new migrations across the sky, their paths spiraling like the flow of time itself. Wolves gathered under twin auroras, howling not in hunger but in reverence. The oceans rolled in slow, deliberate cadence, waves folding over one another like pages reread. Even silence had learned to hum. Arin built his home on the edge of what had once been the glacier, now a valley of running water and golden grass. He no longer needed temples. The world itself had become one. Each morning he rose before the sun, though dawn had ceased to be punctual. The light came when it wished, sometimes from the east, sometimes from nowhere at all, sliding through the air like thought returning to an unfinished sentence. He sat at a rough-hewn table of stone and began to write, not scripture, not prophecy, just witness. His quill was made from the feather of a bird that had hatched from the last snowstorm. Its ink shimmered faintly, changing color with every heartbeat. The words that formed on the page did not stay still. They bent, curved, danced, the letters winding around each other as if unwilling to lie flat. He wrote, "The world begins again, but it remembers how it ended. Each sunrise wears the scars of the last dusk, and the rivers murmur stories of their frozen sleep." His hand trembled, though not from age. The air around him was alive with motion, bees tracing runes in the air, grass swaying in rhythm to unseen music, clouds rolling backward to reveal stars that had not yet risen. He paused to breathe. Even that was new. The air tasted like morning, though he could not tell whose. In the village below, people were learning to live in spirals too. Days did not repeat, but they echoed. Festivals were celebrated before their causes. Marriages remembered before vows were spoken. The people laughed more easily now, their joy carrying the weight of 1,000 unborn memories. Some began to paint the air itself, brushing colors into the mist that hung between moments, turning time into canvas. Others composed songs that could only be heard once yet stayed forever in the bones. When night came, children gathered to tell stories, though none could finish theirs. Endings had become beginnings again. Every tale bled seamlessly into another, and through it all, the faint hum persisted, the pulse of existence, Vetra's song rewritten through every heartbeat. Sometimes Aron would walk the valley at dusk, tracing the rivers that flowed both toward and away from the sea. He liked to find the places where currents met and swirled, the still centers where time hesitated before choosing a direction. That was where he wrote the chronicles. He wrote not as a prophet or a priest, but as one remembering a dream already half forgotten. He wrote about the first storm, the frozen years, the silence that had nearly swallowed everything. He wrote of Vetra, not as goddess, not as myth, but as a pulse that gave the world permission to move again. His words carried the weight of memory and the tenderness of breath. Nothing, he wrote one morning, lasts forever, except the reason it began. He set the quill down, tracing the line with a trembling finger. The ink shimmered briefly, then sank into the page, glowing faintly from beneath the parchment as if the words themselves had roots. He leaned back and looked up. Above him, the aurora shifted, a slow wave of color washing across the sky. Once, it had been frozen, a relic of a halted universe. Now it moved again, deliberate and imperfect, like an artist painting without concern for symmetry. The colors bled together, gold into violet, blue into green, forming a slow spiral that mirrored the flow of time below. Aron smiled. He felt the hum rising through the ground, through his bones, through the very air. It was not loud, but it was everywhere, the living heartbeat of what had once been lost. He closed his eyes and listened. The wind carried whispers, fragments of laughter, words from forgotten languages, the sighs of stars being reborn. The world was remembering itself into being. The next morning, he woke to find the valley covered in dew that glowed faintly with starlight. Each droplet held an image, faces of strangers, flashes of past and futures intertwined. He touched one, and it rippled outward, a soft vibration traveling to the field, stirring petals, wings, and breath alike. The dew remembered, and so did he. He walked until he reached the river and knelt beside it. Its current bent strangely, doubling back on itself before deciding to continue forward. He could see both his reflection and the ghost of his younger self, the man who had carved a goddess's story into the ice. "Still watching me?" he asked softly. The reflection smiled. "Always." The water shimmered, forming faint letters in its flow. "Continue." He nodded. At night, the stars began to whisper again. They were not fixed anymore. They wandered across the heavens, tracing paths through memory. Each constellation told a different story depending on who gazed upon it. Some saw cities long vanished. Others saw unborn tomorrows. Aron saw her. Vetra's light moved among them, not as a single star, but as motion itself, a subtle ripple in the pattern of everything. When he blinked, she was gone. When he exhaled, she returned. He never called her name. He didn't need to. The wind already did it for him. Years passed, though years no longer meant what they used to. Aron aged in spirals, moments of youth returning unexpectedly, hair graying and darkening by turns. He did not resist. Time had ceased to be an arrow. It was now a melody, and he was content to live within its refrain. He kept writing. The chronicles filled shelves carved from living wood, each tome pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. The villagers began to visit him, bringing their dreams for him to record. He wrote those too. Dreams had become part of history now, and history had become part of dreams. One day, a young girl visited him carrying a jar of water that sang softly. "It's from the river," she said. "It hums like you do." He smiled. "That's because it remembers the same things I do." She frowned thoughtfully. "Then will it forget too?" He shook his head. "Forgetting is part of remembering. One cannot exist without the other." She nodded, though she didn't understand. She would, someday, the hum would teach her, As time spiraled outward, the world learned to live with its echoes. When storms came, they carried voices of ancient rain, laughter and thunder, hymns and lightning. The people built homes that breathed with the wind, singing softly in response to passing weather. When night fell, no one feared darkness. It was full now, not empty, filled with the memory of all the light it had ever sheltered. Every newborn carried traces of old souls, fragments of names, habits, songs. Yet they were never burdened by them. Memory was no longer weight. It was rhythm. When two strangers met eyes for the first time, they often smiled, sensing a recognition they could not explain. "We've done this before," they would say, and continue speaking as if resuming an ancient conversation. And somewhere, beneath all that gentle chaos, the hum continued, the song that Vetra had left, the breath that Arn had written into the ice, never stopped. It had become the law of existence. One night, as he sat by the fire, Arn felt a sudden quietness descend. Not absence, but pause. He looked up. The aurora was especially bright, curling across the sky in a perfect spiral, no longer frozen, no longer lost. He whispered her name without sound. The wind replied by brushing his cheek. He laughed softly. "Still correcting me?" A shimmer in the air, a warmth, a tenderness, was the only answer. He picked up his quill one last time and wrote beneath his final line, "To be remembered is to be rewritten. To be rewritten is to live again." He set the page aside and leaned back, letting the hum cradle him. Outside, the stars rearranged themselves into a new pattern, not myth, not prophecy, but something simpler. Two figures walking side by side beneath a swirling sky. The air pulsed once. The world, once broken, breathed again. Its rhythm was imperfect, its path uncertain, but it was alive. And that was enough. Centuries later, the chronicles remained. The ink no longer shimmered, but the pages still vibrated faintly when touched. Those who read them claimed they could hear faint whispers between the lines. Laughter, waves, the sound of snow melting into water. Some said Arn had become part of the hum. Others believed he had followed the spiral beyond the horizon to join Vetra, where memory and possibility entwined. But every dawn, when the aurora moved across the sky, people swore they could see a shadow sitting beneath it, a man with a book in his lap, smiling as the world remembered itself anew. No one ever disturbed him. They only watched in silence as the colors danced above, tracing stories to the heavens. And in every flicker of light, in every child's laughter, in every breath the earth took, one truth echoed softly through time's spiral. Nothing lasts forever, except the reason it began. The aurora moved again. The rivers sang their names. The stars blinked like thoughts being born. The world remembered itself into being, again and again and again, each time more beautiful for having been broken. And in the hum between heartbeats, where silence and song met, the universe whispered its final vow: continue